She stood alone on that burning platform with nothing but a battered trunk and the ashes of her dreams, abandoned like unwanted cargo in a town that already whispered her shame. The man who'd promised her a future had taken one look and walked away without a word, leaving Eliza Harrow stranded 2,000 miles from anything she'd ever known. But before she could buy that ticket back to disgrace, a cowboy she'd never met stepped forward with an offer that would either save her life or destroy what was left of it. Welcome to this story. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this tale travels. And if this story grabs you, hit that like button and stick around until the end. You won't regret it. The train's whistle still echoed across the desert when Eliza Harrow realized she'd made the worst mistake of her life. She stood on the weathered platform of Red Hollow Depot, her worn traveling dress already clinging to her skin in the merciless Arizona heat. Around her, the landscape stretched endlessly, red earth, scattered sage, and a sky so vast it made her feel like an insect waiting to be crushed. The air tasted of dust and coal smoke, and somewhere a windmill creaked its lonely rhythm against the silence. In her gloved hand, she clutched a photograph. The man in the picture looked respectable enough, stern but decent, with clear eyes and a firm jaw. 3 months ago, when she'd answered his advertisement back in Philadelphia, those eyes had seemed to promise stability, safety, a chance to escape the suffocating poverty that had swallowed her after her father's death. Rancher-seeking wife. Must be of good character, hard-working, not afraid of frontier life. Send photograph and letter of introduction. She'd sent her best photograph, the one taken before hunger had made her cheeks hollow. She'd written about her skills, cooking, sewing, managing a household on nothing. She hadn't mentioned the desperation, the landlady's threats, the cold Philadelphia winter spent sharing a single room with 2 other women who sold more than needlework to make their rent. His response had been practical, almost businesslike. Her ticket had arrived with a brief note. "You'll do. Arrive June 15th. I'll meet you at the depot. James Hartwell." Not romantic, but Eliza had stopped believing in romance the day they'd buried her father, and she'd learned that his modest debts would consume everything, including her future. Now she scanned the small crowd gathered at the depot, searching for the man from the photograph. Red Hollow wasn't much. A main street of sun-bleached buildings, a few stores, a saloon with a faded sign, and the train depot itself, which seemed to be the town's primary connection to civilization. Dust devils danced between the scattered buildings, and the few people visible moved slowly, as if the heat had made urgency pointless. "Miss Harrow?" She turned, heart leaping with hope. A man stood a few feet away, tall, clean-shaven, wearing a suit that marked him as someone of means in this rough country. But something in his face made her stomach tighten, even before he spoke again. "I'm James Hartwell." His voice was flat, and his eyes moved over her with the same assessment she'd seen livestock dealers use at the Philadelphia markets. "You're different from your photograph." Eliza's cheeks burned. She knew she looked different. 3 months of careful rationing to save every penny for necessities had left her thinner. The journey itself had been brutal. 3 days of trains, bad food, no proper rest, and the constant fear of what awaited her. But she lifted her chin, refusing to show the shame threatening to choke her. "The journey was difficult," she said quietly, "but I'm healthy and I'm a hard worker, as I wrote in my—" "You're not what I expected." Hartwell cut her off, his tone dismissive. The photograph showed a fuller figure, more suitable for bearing children. The bluntness struck like a slap. Around them, the depot had gone quiet. An older woman near the ticket window had stopped mid-conversation, her eyes bright with interest. 2 men loading freight had slowed their work, clearly listening. "Mr. Hartwell," Eliza began, fighting to keep her voice steady, "if you'll give me a chance to— I've made my decision." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and held it out. "There's enough here for your return ticket and a week's lodging back east. Consider it compensation for your trouble." Eliza stared at the envelope, her vision blurring. This couldn't be happening. Not after she'd sold everything she owned, traveled across an entire continent, risked everything on the promise of a new beginning. "Please," she whispered, hating the desperation in her voice but unable to stop it. "I've come all this way. I'm exactly who I said I was in my letters. I can work hard, I can... The matter is settled. Hartwell's voice carried across the platform, ensuring everyone heard. I need a wife who can contribute to building a strong household. You're clearly not fit for the demands of ranch life. He set the envelope on top of her trunk, a dismissal, a payment, a final rejection, and turned away. Wait! Eliza grabbed his arm, propriety abandoned. Mr. Hartwell, please, just let me explain. He shook off her grip with visible distaste. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Accept the money and go back where you came from. Red Hollow isn't the place for fragile women. He walked away. Just walked away, his boots echoing on the platform, leaving her standing there with every eye in the depot fixed on her humiliation. The older woman near the ticket window leaned toward her companion. Her whisper carried perfectly in the desert air. Mail-order bride. Rejected right off the train. Can you imagine? Probably lied in her letters, the companion replied. They always do. Promise the moon and deliver nothing. Eliza's hands trembled as she picked up the envelope. Inside was a small stack of bills. Enough for a ticket, maybe. Enough to return to Philadelphia with nothing but shame to show for her gamble. Enough to confirm that she was exactly what her aunt had called her, a foolish girl with dreams too big for her circumstances. The train that had brought her sat idle on the tracks, steam hissing from its engine. In an hour, it would head back east, beginning the reverse journey of her shattered hopes. She could be on it. She could run from this moment, from this dusty hellhole where she'd been weighed, measured, and found wanting in front of strangers. Her trunk sat beside her, everything she owned in the world. 3 dresses, her mother's quilt, a small box of letters and photographs, a Bible, her sewing kit, and the blue glass bottle that had belonged to her grandmother. Not much to show for 23 years of life. Excuse me, miss. A young clerk from the depot approached cautiously, as if she might shatter. Will you be needing help with your trunk? The eastbound departs in 45 minutes. 45 minutes. Enough time to buy a ticket, board the train, and disappear from Red Hollow forever. Enough time to accept that she'd failed before she'd even begun. Her voice failed. She cleared her throat and tried again. I need a moment. Of course, miss. The clerk retreated, but she could feel the weight of curious stares from every corner of the depot. Eliza sat down on her trunk, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. The full reality of her situation crashed over her in waves. She had maybe $40 to her name, Hartwell's conscience money. Back in Philadelphia, that might last 2 weeks if she was careful, 3 if she was desperate. Then what? The factories that crushed women's spirits and bodies for pennies a day? The wealthy homes where girls like her scrubbed floors and dodged wandering hands for room and board? The darker options that waited when desperation outweighed dignity? She'd left Philadelphia because staying meant slow starvation or fast corruption. She'd believed that here in this brutal frontier, she might find something different, something honest, even if it was hard. Instead, she'd found a different kind of cruelty, the kind that measured a woman's worth by the width of her hips and dismissed her before she could prove her value. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat trickled down her spine. In the distance, dust devils danced across the empty land, and she thought bitterly that she fit right in, rootless, spinning, going nowhere. Well, well. A new voice cut through her misery, sharp and female. The mail-order bride who couldn't even make it off the platform. Eliza looked up to find a woman in an expensive green dress approaching, parasol shading her from the sun. She was beautiful in a hard, polished way, blonde curls perfectly arranged, skin pale despite the climate, lips painted red. 3 other women followed her, all dressed in finery that seemed absurd against the rough backdrop of Red Hollow. I'm sorry, Eliza managed. Don't be sorry, dear, be smarter. The woman's smile was sharp as glass. I'm Victoria Lansing. My father owns most of Red Hollow, including the land your former intended leases for his pathetic excuse of a ranch. She looked Eliza up and down with the same dismissive assessment Hartwell had used. I tried to warn him that mail-order brides were a waste of time, but men can be so foolishly optimistic. One of Victoria's companions giggled. Jimmy Hartwell's always been desperate. Remember when he tried courting you, Victoria? Please! Victoria's laugh was like breaking glass. As if I'd waste myself on a man whose entire property could fit in my father's north pasture. She turned back to Eliza, and something almost like pity crossed her face. Take the money and go home, miss. Whatever your name is. Red Hollow eats weak women alive. At least back east you'll have a chance. I'm not weak, Eliza heard herself say, the words escaping before caution could stop them. Victoria's eyebrows rose. No? Then why are you sitting on that trunk looking like the world's saddest abandoned puppy? She gestured toward the depot. The train leaves soon. I suggest you be on it. Trust me, there's nothing for women like you out here. Women like you. The phrase landed like a stone in Eliza's chest, heavy with implications. Women without money, without connections, without the armor of wealth and beauty that Victoria Lansing wore like a second skin. Come on, ladies. Victoria twirled her parasol. Let's leave Miss Rejected to her tears. I need to get out of this dreadful heat. They swept away in a rustle of expensive fabric, leaving Eliza alone again with her humiliation and her impossible choice. The depot clock showed 30 minutes until departure. Eliza opened her small purse and counted her money again, as if the bills might have multiplied. $42. The ticket clerk had mentioned lodging. Was there even a respectable boarding house in Red Hollow? And if she stayed, then what? She had no skills that would translate to this rough country. She could sew and cook and manage a household, but those skills required having a household to manage. You planning to sit there until you take root? The new voice was male, rough, and came from somewhere above her. Eliza looked up, squinting against the sun, and found herself staring at a pair of scuffed boots, dusty trousers, and finally, the face of a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same red rock as the surrounding desert. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin that spoke of years in the brutal Arizona sun. His hair was dark brown, too long, touching his collar. His jaw was shadowed with several days of stubble, and his eyes were an unusual shade of gray that seemed to see straight through pretense to the truth underneath. He wasn't handsome, not in the conventional sense. His face was too weathered, his features too rough, but there was something compelling about him, a quiet strength that made Victoria Lansing's polished beauty seem shallow by comparison. I'm sorry, Eliza managed, thrown off balance by his sudden appearance and his blunt manner. You're blocking the platform, he said, though this was clearly untrue. There was plenty of room to walk around her trunk. And you look like you're about to either cry or catch that train. Figured I'd find out which before you do something you regret. The casual arrogance of it sparked something in Eliza, anger maybe, or just exhaustion with being managed by men who thought they knew what was best for her. I don't believe that's any of your business, Mr. Mercer. Cole Mercer. He didn't offer his hand, just stood there studying her with those unsettling gray eyes. And you're right, it's not my business. But I just watched James Hartwell publicly humiliate a woman who traveled 2,000 miles based on his word, and that stuck in my craw. Despite herself, Eliza felt a flicker of something, gratitude perhaps that someone had noticed the cruelty of what had just happened. Mr. Hartwell has every right to change his mind, she said, though the words tasted like ash. I'm not what he expected. No, Cole agreed, and before Eliza could process the sting of that confirmation, he continued. You're probably better. Hartwell's a fool who judges cattle better than people. The unexpected defense caught Eliza off guard. She looked up at the strange cowboy, trying to read his intent, but his weathered face gave nothing away. That's kind of you to say. Not kind, true. He glanced at the depot clock. Train leaves in 25 minutes. You getting on it? It was the same question she'd been asking herself, but hearing it from him made something crystallize in her mind. If she got on that train, she'd be proving Victoria Lansing right. She'd be proving Hartwell right. She'd be proving every doubt she'd ever had about herself right. I don't know, she admitted. I have nowhere else to go. No family, no prospects back east, but here, she gestured at the hostile little town, at the endless desert beyond. Here I have even less. Cole was quiet for a moment, and Eliza had the strange sense that he was weighing something, making a decision that would change more than just this conversation. How much did Hartwell give you? He asked, finally. Eliza's cheeks burned. I don't see how. 40? 50? Cole's tone was matter-of-fact, not prying. Enough for a ticket and a week's rent back wherever you came from, I'd guess. $42? Eliza whispered. And after that week's rent? He already knew the answer, but he waited for her to say it. I'll figure something out. I always do. The lie felt hollow even as she spoke it. Cole nodded slowly, then looked past her to where her trunk sat in the sun. You know how to keep house? The question was so unexpected that Eliza blinked. Yes. I managed my father's household for 5 years before he died. Cook? Yes. Manage livestock? No. But I can learn. I'm not afraid of hard work. You're going to need that. Cole seemed to come to a decision. He straightened, and when he spoke again, his voice carried across the platform with clear authority. Station master? An older man poked his head out of the depot office. Yeah, Cole? Cancel any eastbound ticket for Miss Harrow here. She won't be needing it. The station master's eyebrows shot up, and Eliza felt her heart start to pound. Now, wait just a... she began, but Cole held up a hand. My wife will be staying at Broken Spur Ranch, he continued, his words dropping like stones into the sudden silence. Every conversation on the platform stopped. Every eye turned to stare. We'll need her trunk loaded onto my wagon. Wife. The word hung in the air, impossible and absurd. Eliza opened her mouth to protest, to correct this insane stranger, but Cole's gray eyes met hers with an intensity that stopped her breath. Unless, he said quietly, pitching his voice for her ears only, you'd rather get on that train and prove Victoria Lansing right about women like you. Women like you? Eliza's mind raced. This was insane. This man was a complete stranger. She didn't even know if he actually owned a ranch or if this was some elaborate frontier con. But as she looked at Cole Mercer's weathered face, she saw something that had been absent in Hartwell's dismissal and Victoria's mockery. Respect. Not for who she might be or what she might look like, but for the simple fact that she deserved better than public humiliation and a one-way ticket to nowhere. Her voice came out as a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. I don't understand. It's simple. Cole kept his voice low, but his eyes never left hers. You need a place to stay and work to do. I need help running a ranch that's been falling apart since my sister left last year. This isn't romance, Miss Harrow. It's not even courtship. It's a business arrangement. You don't know anything about me. I know you traveled 2,000 miles on a promise. I know you didn't break when Hartwell humiliated you. I know you're still sitting here thinking instead of running, which means you've got spine. He paused. That's more than I can say for most folks in this town. But wife? The word felt strange in her mouth. In name only, Cole clarified. For appearance's sake. Unmarried women don't last long out here without protection, but the work is real and so is the pay. Room and board plus $30 a month if you can keep the house running and the ranch accounts in order. $30 a month. More than she could make at any factory back east. Enough to save, to build something, to have options beyond desperation. And if it doesn't work out, she asked, then I'll pay your way to wherever you want to go, with 3 months' wages as severance. You won't leave here worse off than you arrived. It was crazy, absolutely crazy. But as Eliza looked around the depot, at the station master waiting for an answer, at the curious faces watching her humiliation, at the train that would carry her back to certain poverty, she realized she'd already made her choice. She'd made it the moment she'd left Philadelphia. She'd made it when she'd answered that advertisement. She'd made it every time she'd chosen the uncertain hope of something better over the certain misery of settling for less. All right, she said, and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. I accept your offer, Mr. Mercer. Something flickered in Cole's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or approval. He nodded once, then raised his voice again. Station master, the ladies decided. Load her trunk onto my wagon. We've got a long ride ahead. The depot erupted into whispers, but Cole ignored them. He held out his hand to Eliza, not as a suitor might, but as one partner to another. Can you ride? He asked. A little? It's been a while. You'll remember. He lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing and headed toward a wagon parked in the shade of the depot. Come on then, standing around giving these vultures something to talk about won't make the ride home any shorter. Eliza grabbed her small carpet bag and followed, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. As she passed the ticket window, she caught the station master's eye. "Congratulations, Mrs. Mercer," he said, and there was something almost like approval in his weathered face. Mrs. Mercer. The name felt foreign, like a costume that didn't quite fit. But as Eliza climbed into the wagon beside this strange cowboy who'd just claimed her as his wife, she realized that nothing in her life had ever fit quite right. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the frontier wasn't about fitting in. Maybe it was about building something new from the broken pieces of what came before. Cole settled onto the wagon seat beside her and took up the reins. The horses, two sturdy bays, shifted in their traces, ready to go. "Last chance," Cole said, not looking at her. "Once we leave this depot, the whole town will know you as my wife. No taking it back without scandal." Eliza looked back at the train, at the platform where she'd been rejected, at the route back to everything she'd tried to escape. Then she looked ahead, at the empty road leading into the desert, at the unknown waiting beyond the horizon. "I'm ready," she said. Cole nodded once and clicked to the horses. The wagon lurched forward, and Red Hollow Depot fell away behind them. They rode in silence for a long time, the wagon wheels crunching over the hard-packed road, the sun beating down mercilessly. Eliza tried to process what had just happened, but her mind felt numb, as if the shock of the day had finally overwhelmed her capacity to react. She studied Cole from the corner of her eye. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes and mouth, marks of a hard life lived outdoors. His hands on the reins were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who worked with them every day. He wore simple clothes, worn trousers, a faded shirt, dusty boots, but everything was clean and well-maintained. "How far is it?" she asked finally, needing to break the silence. "About 2 hours." Cole kept his eyes on the road ahead. "Broken spurs northwest of town, up in the foothills. Better water than the lower ranges, but harder country." "And you run it alone?" "Have been since my sister married and moved to Tucson last year. Before that, she helped with the house and the accounts while I handled the cattle and the land." He paused. "Ranch isn't big, about 500 acres, maybe 60 head of cattle. But it's mine, bought and paid for." Pride colored that last statement, and Eliza understood. In a world where most men worked for other people's dreams, Cole Mercer owned his own. "What happened to your parents?" she asked, then wondered if she'd overstepped. But Cole didn't seem offended. "Father died when I was 15. Mother followed 6 months later. Think she just didn't want to be here without him." He said it matter-of-factly, but Eliza heard the old grief underneath. "Sarah, my sister, was 12. We kept the ranch together until she was old enough to have her own life." "That must have been difficult." "Difficult's relative. We survived. That's what matters out here." He glanced at her briefly. "You understand that?" "Yes," Eliza said quietly. "I understand survival." Something in her tone made Cole look at her again, really look at her, and Eliza had the unsettling sense that he saw far more than she'd intended to reveal. "Your father?" he asked. "Died 8 months ago. Heart gave out." She kept her voice steady with effort. "He left debts. I sold everything to pay them, but it wasn't enough. I was facing—" She trailed off, unable to voice the options that had waited for her. "So you answered Hartwell's advertisement?" "Yes, and now you're married to a different stranger, heading to a ranch you've never seen, in country that kills the unprepared." Cole's tone was dry. "Some might call that going from bad to worse." "Some might," Eliza agreed. "What would you call it?" Cole was quiet for a moment, then, "A second chance, if you're smart enough to take it." They crested a rise, and suddenly the landscape opened up before them. Red rock formations jutted from the earth like broken bones. And in the distance, mountains rose against the impossible blue sky. It was harsh and beautiful and utterly unforgiving. "There," Cole said, pointing to a cluster of buildings in the middle distance. "That's Broken Spur." Eliza's breath caught. The ranch house was small, a simple structure of wood and stone, but it sat in a valley, where scrub grass grew, and a line of cottonwood trees marked what must be a creek. Outbuildings clustered nearby, a barn, a corral, what looked like a chicken coop. It wasn't much, but in this empty land, it looked like a miracle. "It's not fancy," Cole warned, as if reading her thoughts. "House needs work, roof leaks in the back room, gardens mostly dead. Haven't had time for anything but keeping the cattle alive and the bank from taking the place." "The bank?" Eliza felt a chill despite the heat. "Had a bad year, lost cattle in a drought, then lost more to rustlers. Bank extended the mortgage, but they're watching close." He said it calmly, but Eliza heard the weight of it. "That's why I need help. Can't run a ranch and manage a household and keep the accounts straight all at once. Something's got to give, and I'd rather it not be the land." So that was it. Not charity, not even kindness, really, just practical necessity. He needed help, and she needed shelter. It was, as he'd said, a business arrangement. Somehow, that made it easier to accept. "I can keep accounts," Eliza said. "My father was a clerk. He taught me bookkeeping." Cole's expression shifted, something like relief crossing his face. "That'll help. Sarah tried, but numbers weren't her strong suit. Current ledgers are a mess." They descended into the valley, and as they drew closer to the ranch, Eliza could see the truth of Cole's words. The house desperately needed paint. The garden was a tangle of dead plants and weeds. Several fence posts in the corral leaned at dangerous angles. It was clear that this was a place where survival had taken precedence over maintenance. But it was also clear that someone had cared for it once. The house's bones were good: solid construction, well-placed windows, a deep porch that would provide shade in summer. The barn, though weathered, was sound. This wasn't neglect born of laziness. This was a man stretched too thin, fighting to keep what was his. Cole pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. For a moment he just sat there, and Eliza wondered what he was thinking. Was he having second thoughts? Realizing the absurdity of bringing a strange woman to his isolated ranch? But when he finally spoke, his words surprised her. "I should have told you before we left town," he said. "What people will say, what they'll assume about this arrangement." "I can imagine," Eliza said dryly. "Victoria Lansing certainly had opinions." "Victoria Lansing is a snake in a silk dress," Cole said flatly. "Her father, Cyrus Lansing, owns half the territory and wants to own the rest. He's been trying to buy Broken Spur for years, and when I won't sell, he makes my life difficult." "How difficult?" "Cattle disappear. Water rights get challenged. Bank gets reminded of my debt." Cole's jaw tightened, and his daughter spreads gossip designed to run decent people out of town. Eliza absorbed this. So she'd gained not just a place to stay, but also enemies she hadn't known existed. "Why does he want your ranch so badly?" she asked. "Creek," Cole nodded toward the line of cottonwoods. "Runs year-round, even in drought. In this country, water is worth more than gold. Lansing wants to control every source between here and Red Hollow. And you won't sell." "This is my home, my father's home. I'll die before I hand it over to Cyrus Lansing." The quiet intensity in Cole's voice made it clear this wasn't a figure of speech. He climbed down from the wagon and came around to help Eliza down. She hesitated, then accepted his hand. His grip was firm and warm, and he steadied her carefully as she navigated the awkward step from wagon to ground. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and released her hand immediately, already moving to unload her trunk. Eliza stood in the dusty yard, looking at the house that was now supposedly hers, and felt the full weight of what she'd agreed to settle over her like a heavy blanket. A door slammed, making her jump. An old man emerged from the barn, bow-legged and grizzled, squinting at her with undisguised suspicion. "Who's this?" he demanded, his tone suggesting he expected the answer to disappoint him. "My wife," Cole said calmly, setting Eliza's trunk on the porch. "Eliza, this is Hank Coltrane. He helps with the horses and the cattle." "Your wife?" Hank's eyes went wide. "Since when?" "Since today." "Today?" Hank's voice rose to a near shout. "You went to town for supplies and came back with a wife?" "Had to pick her up at the depot," Cole said, as if this explained everything. "Where's Charlie?" "Fixing fence in the south pasture. Hank was still staring at Eliza like she was a hallucination. Cole, what in the hell? Language, Cole interrupted. There's a lady present. Eliza almost laughed at the absurdity of it, being defended from swearing by a man who'd just publicly claimed her as his wife without so much as asking her full name first. Hank looked between them, and Eliza saw the exact moment he decided not to push the issue. Whatever else Cole Mercer was, he clearly commanded loyalty. Well then, Hank said finally. Welcome to Broken Spur, Mrs. Mercer. Hope you know what you're getting into. I don't, Eliza admitted, but I'm learning quickly. That startled a laugh out of the old cowboy. Honest, at least. That's better than most. He tipped his hat to her and headed back toward the barn, muttering under his breath. Cole picked up Eliza's trunk again. I'll show you the house. Eliza followed him onto the porch, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment when reality would either match or destroy the fragile hope she'd built on the ride here. Cole opened the door, and Eliza stepped into her new home. The first impression was of neglect, but not filth. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. Furniture was sparse but sturdy, a table with 4 chairs, a worn sofa, a rocking chair by the fireplace. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs decorated the corners. But beneath the neglect, Eliza could see the bones of something good. Large windows let in light, though they badly needed cleaning. The floor was wooden, scarred, but solid. The kitchen area held a good stove, a dry sink, and shelves that had once been neatly organized but now held a chaotic jumble of supplies. 2 bedrooms, Cole said, pointing to doors on either side of the main room. You'll take Sarah's old room. It's cleaner than mine. Privy's out back past the chicken coop, though we only have 3 chickens left and they're half wild. Creek's a 5-minute walk for washing water, but there's a well pump in the yard for drinking. He set her trunk down and stood there awkwardly, as if uncertain what came next. I'll let you settle in, he said finally. Hank and Charlie will be expecting supper around 6. Nothing fancy, we're used to beans and biscuits. Mr. Mercer, Eliza said, stopping him as he turned to leave. He looked back, waiting. Why did you do this? She asked. Really? You could have hired someone to help with the house. You didn't need to claim me as your wife. Cole was quiet for a long moment, and Eliza thought he might not answer. But then he spoke, his voice low and serious. I watched my sister fight this country for 10 years, watched her work herself to exhaustion trying to prove she belonged here. And when she finally left to get married, you know what she said? He paused. She said she was tired of being afraid. Afraid of the work? Afraid of the Lansings, afraid of what people would say about an unmarried woman running a ranch with her brother. He met Eliza's eyes directly. I saw you on that platform, and I saw someone who'd already fought enough. Figured you deserved a chance to stand your ground without being afraid. He shrugged. Besides, I meant what I said. I need help. This arrangement benefits us both. It was the most words he'd strung together since they'd met, and Eliza heard the truth in them. Not romance, not rescue, just 2 people making a practical choice in a hard world. Thank you, she said quietly, for the chance. Cole nodded once and left, pulling the door shut behind him. Eliza stood alone in the dusty house, in the middle of the Arizona desert, married in name to a stranger, 2,000 miles from everything she'd ever known. And for the first time since her father's death, she smiled. Because this neglected ranch, this practical arrangement, this harsh and beautiful country, this she could work with, this she could build on. This was a second chance, just as Cole had said. She rolled up her sleeves and looked around the room with new eyes, not seeing the dust and neglect, but seeing the potential underneath. All right then, she said to the empty room. Let's begin. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon when Eliza finally stopped to assess her work. Her arms ached, her dress was filthy, and sweat had plastered her hair to her forehead despite the pins that were supposed to hold it in place. But the main room of the house looked almost habitable. She'd swept the floors until the wood grain showed through years of dust. She'd wiped down every surface, organized the chaotic kitchen shelves, and scrubbed the windows until light poured through them. The cobwebs were gone. The fireplace was cleaned out, and she'd even managed to beat most of the dust from the old sofa cushions. It wasn't perfect. The furniture was still worn, the walls still needed paint, And there were a dozen other things that needed attention, but it was a start. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since a stale roll on the train that morning. More importantly, she'd promised supper for 3 men at 6 o'clock, and she had no idea what supplies were available or how to use the ancient stove that dominated the kitchen area. Eliza opened the pantry and took stock. Flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, a few withered potatoes, some suspicious-looking onions, and not much else. It was the pantry of men who ate for survival, not pleasure. But she'd worked with less. She got the stove going. It took 3 tries and some creative coaxing, but eventually the fire caught, and set about making something edible from the limited supplies. Beans needed to soak, but there wasn't time. She'd have to make do with what could be prepared quickly: biscuits, fried salt pork, and if those potatoes were salvageable, maybe some hash to go with it. As she worked, her mind drifted to the strangeness of her situation. This morning she'd been Eliza Harrow, failed mail-order bride, standing humiliated on a train platform. Now she was supposedly Eliza Mercer, wife to a rancher she'd known for all of 4 hours. The transformation was so absurd that if she'd read it in a novel, she would have thrown the book across the room for being unrealistic. Yet here she was, cooking supper in a stranger's kitchen, in a house that was supposedly hers, in a marriage that wasn't really a marriage at all. The door opened, and Cole stepped in, stopping short when he saw the transformed room. His eyes traveled over the clean floors, the organized shelves, the gleaming windows, and something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe, or appreciation. "You've been busy," he said. "The house needed it." Eliza turned back to the stove, suddenly self-conscious. "I hope you don't mind. I know I should have asked before rearranging things, but it looks good," Cole interrupted. "Better than it has in over a year." He moved to the dry sink and pumped water to wash his hands. Sarah would be pleased. Eliza watched him from the corner of her eye. He moved with economical efficiency, wasting no motion, comfortable in the space even though it clearly hadn't been cared for in months. When he turned back, he caught her watching and raised an eyebrow. "Something wrong?" "No, I realized I don't know anything about you. We're supposedly married, but I don't even know how old you are." Cole leaned against the counter, considering her. 32, you?" 23. "Favorite color?" The question was so unexpected that Eliza laughed. "What?" "You said we don't know anything about each other. Figured we should start somewhere." A hint of amusement touched his eyes. "Favorite color seems safer than most topics." "Blue," Eliza said, still smiling. "Like the sky right before sunset. You?" "Don't really have one. Never thought about it much." He paused. "Red, I guess, like the rocks in the canyon." They stood there for a moment, and Eliza had the strange sense that they'd just crossed some invisible line, moved from strangers to something slightly less foreign. The door banged open again, and 2 men tramped in, Hank, whom she'd met earlier, and a younger man who must be Charlie. He was barely 20, with sun-bleached hair and a face full of freckles that made him look even younger. "Holy hell," Charlie breathed, staring around the room. "What happened in here?" "Language," Cole said automatically. "Charlie, this is my wife, Eliza." "Eliza, Charlie Dawson. He helps with the cattle and the horses." "Ma'am?" Charlie snatched his hat off and held it awkwardly. "I mean, Mrs. Mercer, He shot Cole a desperate look. "Boss, you didn't say anything about getting married." "Didn't know myself until this morning," Cole said calmly. "This morning?" Hank snorted. "That's one hell of a courtship." Eliza felt her cheeks heat, but before she could respond, Cole spoke up, his tone leaving no room for argument. Eliza answered a mail-order advertisement. The man who sent for her was a fool who didn't deserve her. I offered her honest work and a fair arrangement. That's all anyone needs to know. The blunt summary silenced both men, though Eliza saw speculation in their eyes. They thought they knew what this was: a desperate woman and a lonely rancher making a convenient arrangement. They weren't entirely wrong, but they weren't entirely right either. "Supper will be ready in 10 minutes, she said, reclaiming control of the conversation. "I hope you're not expecting anything fancy." "Ma'am, if it's hot and edible, it'll be the best meal we've had in months," Charlie said earnestly. He wasn't exaggerating. When Eliza set the food on the table, crispy salt pork, fluffy biscuits, and potato hash that had turned out better than expected, All three men dug in with an enthusiasm that was both flattering and slightly alarming. They ate like they weren't sure where the next meal was coming from. "This is good," Cole said after several minutes of focused eating. "Really good." "It's just simple fare," Eliza protested. "Ma'am, Cole's idea of cooking is burning beans and calling it done," Hank said. "This is a feast." Conversation was sparse during the meal. The men were too focused on eating, but Eliza used the time to observe. Cole ate methodically, his attention partly on the food and partly somewhere else, likely running through the endless list of ranch tasks. Hank ate with the careful appreciation of someone who'd gone hungry enough times to never take food for granted, and Charlie ate with the uncomplicated enthusiasm of youth. When the meal was finished and the men had gone back outside to handle evening chores, Eliza cleared the table and washed the dishes, her mind spinning. This was her life now, cooking for ranch hands, cleaning a house that was slowly falling apart, pretending to be married to a man who was still essentially a stranger. The absurdity of it should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: purpose. For the first time since her father's death, she had work that mattered, a place that needed her, and people who weren't looking at her with pity or contempt. She was still washing dishes when Cole came back in, dust-covered and tired. "Need to talk to you about tomorrow," he said, leaning against the doorframe. Eliza dried her hands and turned to face him. "All right." "Hank and Charlie are good men, but they're going to talk. By noon tomorrow, everyone in Red Hollow will know I came home with a wife." He paused. "People are going to have questions, going to make assumptions. Let them," Eliza said. "We know the truth. The truth doesn't matter much in a small town. What matters is what people believe." Cole ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that suggested this conversation was harder for him than his tone let on. "I need you to understand what you're walking into. Cyrus Lansing owns most of the businesses in Red Hollow. His daughter Victoria runs the social side of town. If they decide you're not welcome, they can make your life miserable." "They've already decided that," Eliza pointed out. "Victoria made it very clear what she thought of women like me." Something dangerous flashed in Cole's eyes. "What exactly did she say to you?" "That I should go back east before Red Hollow ate me alive." Eliza kept her voice steady. "That there was nothing here for women like me." Cole was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight. "Victoria Lansing is a bully who mistakes cruelty for power. Don't let her make you feel small." "I won't." Eliza met his eyes directly. "I've dealt with worse than Victoria Lansing." "I believe that." Cole pushed away from the doorframe. "But just so you know, if she or anyone else gives you real trouble, you tell me. You're under my protection now. That means something." The fierce protectiveness in his voice surprised Eliza. This wasn't just about the practical arrangement they'd made. This was personal. "Thank you," she said quietly. Cole nodded and headed toward his bedroom, then stopped. "About the sleeping arrangements, I want to be clear. Your room is yours. I won't intrude. This marriage is in name only, and it stays that way unless you decide different." The statement was so direct, so carefully respectful, that Eliza felt a rush of gratitude. "I appreciate that," she said. "Just wanted it said plain." He disappeared into his room, and Eliza heard the door close softly. She stood alone in the clean kitchen, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. The distant lowing of cattle, the creak of the windmill, the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods. It was so different from Philadelphia, from the cramped boarding house and the constant noise of the city. Here, she could breathe. Eliza finished the dishes and retreated to what was now her room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a simple dresser, and a window that looked out over the valley. Someone, Sarah probably, had made curtains from cheerful yellow fabric, though they were faded now and needed washing. She unpacked her trunk carefully, hanging her few dresses in the small wardrobe and arranging her personal items on the dresser. Her mother's quilt she spread on the bed, and the blue glass bottle she placed on the windowsill where it would catch the morning light. When everything was put away, Eliza sat on the bed and let herself feel the full weight of the day. 24 hours ago, she'd been on a train, terrified but hopeful. 12 hours ago, she'd been humiliated and abandoned. 6 hours ago, she'd gambled everything on a stranger's offer. And now she was here, in this small room, in this isolated ranch, in a life she could never have imagined. She should be terrified. She should be planning her escape. Instead, she felt something that might have been hope beginning to take root. Sleep came slowly, accompanied by the unfamiliar sounds of the desert night. But when it came, Eliza didn't dream of Philadelphia or her father or the life she'd left behind. She dreamed of gardens growing in red earth, of windows letting in light, of a house slowly becoming a home. The rooster woke her before dawn, a scraggly, aggressive bird that Hank had failed to mention lived right outside her window. Eliza dressed quickly in her oldest work dress and ventured out into the pre-dawn darkness. The ranch was already stirring. She could hear movement from the barn, the sound of horses being fed. Cole and his men were already at work while the sky was still dark. Eliza got the stove going and started coffee, then began working on breakfast. She found eggs in the chicken coop. The 3 half-wild hens had apparently been productive, and used them to make scrambled eggs and more biscuits. It wasn't elaborate, but it was hot and filling. The men came in just as the sun broke over the eastern mountains, bringing with them the smell of horses and honest work. They ate quickly, and Eliza noticed Cole watching her with a thoughtful expression. "What?" she finally asked. "You're up early," he said. "So are you." "I run a ranch. You're supposed to be settling in." "I am settled." Eliza poured more coffee. "What needs doing today?" Cole exchanged glances with Hank and Charlie. "Plenty, but most of it's not suitable for a woman?" Eliza interrupted. "Mr. Mercer, I didn't come here to sit in a clean house and wait for you to decide what I'm capable of handling. What needs doing?" A slow smile crossed Cole's face, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Garden's dead. Chicken coop needs repairs, accounts are a disaster, house still needs work. Take your pick." "I'll start with the accounts," Eliza said. "If the bank is watching you closely, you need to know exactly where you stand financially. Where are the ledgers?" Cole's smile faded into something more serious. "In my room, but Eliza, those books they're not good. Some of what you'll see in there might make you reconsider this arrangement." "Then we'd better know the worst of it," Eliza said calmly. "Ignorance won't help anyone." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll get them after breakfast." True to his word, Cole brought her a stack of ledgers after the meal. They were, as he'd warned, a disaster. Sarah's handwriting was neat, but her bookkeeping was chaotic. Entries weren't dated properly, expenses and income were mixed together, and some pages were simply blank for months at a time. Eliza spent the morning carefully reconstructing the ranch's financial history. It was grim reading. Cole had lost nearly half his cattle in last year's drought. The remaining herd was barely enough to generate income. He'd taken a loan from the Red Hollow Bank, signed by one Cyrus Lansing as president, at interest rates that made Eliza's blood boil. At the current rate, he'd be paying off that loan for the next decade, assuming he could keep making the payments at all. She was deep in calculations when the sound of approaching horses interrupted her concentration. Eliza went to the window and saw an elegant buggy pulling into the yard, driven by a man in expensive clothes. Even from a distance, she recognized the imperious set of his shoulders. Cole emerged from the barn, and Eliza saw his whole body tense. Without thinking, she grabbed a shawl and headed outside. "Don't care what arrangement you've made," the man in the buggy was saying as Eliza approached. "The payment is due next week, and the bank expects—" He stopped when he saw Eliza. "Who is this?" "My wife," Cole said, and Eliza heard steel in his voice. "Eliza, this is Cyrus Lansing. He owns the bank and most of Red Hollow." Cyrus Lansing was a big man in his 50s, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that assessed Eliza the way a merchant might assess questionable merchandise. "Your wife," he repeated slowly. "Funny, I heard you picked up some abandoned mail-order bride from the depot yesterday. Didn't realize you'd actually married the poor creature." The casual cruelty of it took Eliza's breath away, but Cole's expression didn't change. "We married yesterday," he said evenly. "Eliza is mistress of Broken Spur now." "How convenient." Lansing's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And does the new Mrs. Mercer know about your financial situation? About how close you are to losing this place?" "I know exactly where we stand," Eliza said, stepping forward before Cole could answer. I've spent the morning reviewing the accounts. Lansing's eyebrows rose. Have you now? And what did those accounts tell you? That the loan you gave my husband carries interest rates 30% higher than the standard rate in Arizona territory, Eliza said calmly, and that the payment schedule was structured to make it nearly impossible for him to get ahead. A moment of shocked silence followed. Then Lansing laughed, but there was no humor in it. Interesting, he said. Very interesting. Tell me, Mrs. Mercer, did you also notice that your husband has no collateral beyond this ranch? That if he misses even one payment, the bank can foreclose immediately? I noticed, Eliza said. I also noticed that the loan agreement requires 30 days' notice before foreclosure proceedings can begin, which means even if my husband were to miss the payment next week, which he won't, you couldn't take action for a month. Cole was staring at her, and Eliza could feel Hank and Charlie watching from the barn, but she kept her eyes on Lansing, refusing to be intimidated. Lansing's expression hardened. You're cleverer than you look, but clever doesn't change facts. This ranch is failing, and no amount of bookkeeping will save it. We'll see about that, Eliza said quietly. Indeed we will. Lansing gathered his reins. Enjoy your new home, Mrs. Mercer. I suspect you won't be here long enough to get comfortable. He drove away, leaving dust and tension in his wake. Cole waited until the buggy was out of sight before speaking. Where did you learn about territorial lending rates? My father worked for a bank before he became a clerk, Eliza said. I used to help him with paperwork. I know enough to recognize predatory lending when I see it. Predatory lending, Cole repeated. That's exactly what it is. Lansing knew I was desperate after the drought. He structured that loan to fail. How much is the payment next week? Eliza asked. Cole's jaw tightened. $200. $200. Eliza's heart sank. That was nearly 5 months of her promised wages. Do you have it? Most of it. I've got 160 from selling 3 steers last month. Need another 40, and I don't have anything left to sell that won't cripple the ranch. Eliza thought quickly. What about the spring calves? When do they typically sell? Not for another month. They're not ready yet. And there's no way to get an advance from a buyer? Not enough to make a difference. Most buyers around here deal through Lansing's auction house. He controls the market. Of course he did. Eliza felt anger building in her chest. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, calculating fury that had gotten her through the worst days after her father's death. Then we need to find another option, she said. I'm open to suggestions, Cole said, but his tone suggested he'd already exhausted all possibilities. Eliza looked around the ranch, at the neglected house, the half-wild chickens, the dead garden. Then an idea began to form. The garden, she said slowly. How long has it been dead? Since the drought. Why? Because Red Hollow is a desert town, which means fresh vegetables are probably expensive and hard to come by. Eliza's mind was racing now. If we could revive the garden, get it producing quickly, we could sell the produce in town. Cole looked skeptical. Eliza, it takes months to grow vegetables. We have a week. Not if we focus on fast-growing crops. Radishes mature in 3 weeks. Lettuce in 4. But there are wild plants in the desert that are edible right now. Prickly pear fruit, mesquite pods, even some of the herbs growing along the creek. You want to sell cactus fruit to pay the bank? Hank had wandered over, openly doubtful. I want to sell anything that will bring in $40 in the next week, Eliza said. Can it be done? Cole was quiet for a long moment, and Eliza watched him think through the logistics. Finally, he nodded slowly. Maybe. There's a market day in Red Hollow every Saturday. If we could gather enough produce by then, and if people actually buy it, he trailed off, the doubt clear in his voice. They'll buy it, Eliza said with more confidence than she felt. Women in town are tired of the same dried goods and expensive imported vegetables. Fresh local produce, even if it's unconventional, will sell. You sure about this? Cole asked. No, Eliza wanted to say. I'm not sure about anything, but instead she squared her shoulders and met his eyes. No, she admitted, but it's better than doing nothing. Cole studied her for another moment, then a slow smile crossed his face. That same real smile she'd seen at breakfast. All right then, he said, let's give it a try. Worst case, we're no worse off than we already are. The next 5 days were the hardest work Eliza had ever done. She started each morning before dawn, gathering wild plants along the creek and in the foothills, prickly pear fruit that had to be carefully dethorned, mesquite pods that could be ground into flour, wild herbs that grew in the rocky soil. Her hands were covered in scratches and prickly pear spines despite her careful work, but she kept going. In the afternoons, she attacked the garden with a determination that bordered on fury. The soil was hard and dry, but the creek provided water, and Eliza discovered that beneath the dead plants, some root systems were still alive. She cleared, watered, planted fast-growing seeds that Cole had stored away, and prayed that something would grow in time. Cole watched her work with an expression she couldn't quite read. Sometimes he helped, carrying water or clearing particularly stubborn rocks. Other times he just observed, and Eliza wondered what he was thinking. On the third day, as she was watering newly planted radish seeds, he spoke up. "You don't have to do this, you know." Eliza looked up, confused. "Do what?" "Kill yourself trying to save the ranch. This isn't your debt. You could leave right now with the money I promised you, and no one would blame you." "I would blame me," Eliza said. "Besides, I'm not doing this just for you. I'm doing it for me." "For you?" "I'm tired of running." Eliza sat back on her heels, dirt under her fingernails and sweat on her brow. "I'm tired of being pushed around by people like Lansing and Victoria and James Hartwell. I'm tired of being told what I can't do, where I don't belong, what I'm not worth." She looked around the struggling garden, at the ranch beyond. "This place needs me. Maybe for the first time in my life, I'm actually needed. So yes, I'm going to fight for it." Cole was quiet for so long that Eliza thought she'd said too much, but when he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Thank you," he said simply. Those 2 words carried more weight than any flowery speech could have. By Friday evening, they had gathered an impressive amount of produce, baskets of prickly pear fruit, bundles of wild herbs, several pounds of mesquite pods, and even some early radishes that Eliza had coaxed from the garden through sheer force of will. It wasn't much compared to what an established farm might bring, but it was something. "Think it'll be enough?" Charlie asked as they loaded the wagon for the morning trip to town. "It has to be," Eliza said. That night, she barely slept. Tomorrow would determine whether her gamble paid off or whether Broken Spur Ranch would slide one step closer to foreclosure. She lay in her small bed, listening to the desert night, and tried not to think about what failure would mean. Morning came too quickly. Eliza dressed in her best remaining dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days but was at least clean and mended, and braided her hair carefully. If she was going to face down the town that had whispered about her rejection, she'd do it looking as respectable as possible. Cole was already loading the last baskets when she came outside. He'd cleaned up too, shaved, changed into a clean shirt, made an effort. When he saw her, something shifted in his expression. "You look nice," he said, then seemed surprised he'd said it out loud. "Thank you." Eliza felt her cheeks warm. "So do you." They rode toward Red Hollow in the early morning light, the wagon loaded with their desperate harvest. Neither spoke much, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. Eliza found herself acutely aware of Cole beside her, the steady way he handled the reins, the quiet confidence in his posture, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, reading the land like others might read a book. "Nervous?" he asked as the town came into view. "Terrified," Eliza admitted. "Good. Means you care about the outcome." He glanced at her. "Whatever happens today, you've already done more than anyone had a right to expect. Remember that." Red Hollow's market day was held in the town square, a dusty open area where vendors set up tables and locals came to buy, sell, and gossip. When Cole and Eliza arrived, several heads turned and the whispers started immediately. "Just ignore them," Cole muttered, helping Eliza down from the wagon. But ignoring the stares was easier said than done. As they set up their table and arranged their produce, Eliza felt every eye on her. She heard fragments of conversation, that mail-order bride, Mercer's desperate, won't last a month, and had to fight the urge to climb back in the wagon and flee. Then Victoria Lansing appeared, dressed in a confection of pink silk that must have cost more than everything Eliza owned combined. 3 of her friends trailed behind her like ladies in waiting. Well, well, Victoria said loudly enough for everyone to hear. If it isn't Mrs. Mercer, how domestic you look, selling your little cactus fruits like a common vendor. Miss Lansing, Eliza said evenly, refusing to be baited. Victoria picked up one of the prickly pear fruits, examining it with exaggerated distaste. And you expect people to actually buy this? Desert scraps that anyone could pick for free? These fruits have been carefully harvested and prepared, Eliza said. All the thorns removed, ready to eat or preserve. Same with the mesquite flower and the herbs. It's quality local produce. It's desperation, Victoria said flatly. She set the fruit down and looked directly at Eliza. Everyone knows Mercer can't make his loan payment. This pathetic display won't change that. Around them, the market had gone quiet. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how this would play out. Eliza felt her heart pounding, but she kept her voice steady. I'm not sure why you're so concerned with my husband's finances, Miss Lansing, unless your father sent you to intimidate us. Victoria's eyes flashed. My father doesn't need to send me anywhere. I'm here of my own accord trying to help you understand reality. You're an outsider who doesn't understand this territory. You can't just show up and expect to— Excuse me! A new voice cut through Victoria's tirade. An older woman pushed past Victoria's friends and approached the table. Are these radishes fresh? Eliza blinked, thrown by the interruption. Yes, ma'am. Picked this morning. I'll take all of them. The woman, weathered, practical, with kind eyes, looked directly at Victoria. Unlike some people, I know good value when I see it, and I'm tired of paying Lansing's store 3 times what vegetables are worth. She paid Eliza, took the radishes, and walked away. A moment of stunned silence followed, then another woman approached. Is that mesquite flour? My grandmother used to make the most wonderful bread with it. I'll take 2 pounds. Then another customer, and another. Within minutes, people were crowding around the table, asking questions, buying produce, deliberately turning their backs on Victoria Lansing's performance. Eliza worked frantically to keep up with the demand, weighing produce, making change, answering questions. Beside her, Cole handled the heavier baskets, his quiet presence steadying her. Victoria stood frozen, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. Finally, she spun on her heel and stalked away, her friends scurrying after her. But Eliza barely noticed. She was too busy selling every last item on their table. By noon, they'd sold everything, every prickly pear fruit, every bundle of herbs, every pound of mesquite flour. The radishes had gone first, then the wild sage that Eliza had gathered from the creek. Even the slightly misshapen squash that she'd rescued from the garden had found a buyer. Cole counted the money 3 times, as if he couldn't believe it. $53, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. We made $53. Combined with what he already had, it was enough, more than enough. They could make the loan payment with money to spare. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. We did it. No. Cole looked at her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. You did it. This was your idea, your work. You saved the ranch. We saved it, Eliza corrected. Together. Cole held her gaze for a long moment, and something passed between them. An understanding, a connection deeper than their practical arrangement had suggested possible. Mr. Mercer. The bank clerk was approaching, a nervous-looking young man with ink-stained fingers. Mr. Lansing sent me to collect your payment. He said, Here. Cole counted out $200 and handed it over. Full payment, on time. You can tell Lansing we'll be making the next payment on time, too. The clerk's eyes widened as he counted the money. Yes, sir. I'll let him know. As the clerk scurried away, Cole turned back to Eliza, and for the first time since they'd met, he smiled, really smiled, with genuine joy. Let's go home, he said. Home. The words settled over Eliza like a warm blanket. Not the house, not the ranch, but home. They climbed back into the wagon, and as they drove out of Red Hollow, Eliza looked back at the town that had rejected her, gossiped about her, tried to crush her. She'd faced it down and won, not through wealth or connections or conventional beauty, but through work and determination and refusing to accept what others said she was worth. The ride back to Broken Spur felt different from any previous journey. Cole was more relaxed, occasionally pointing out landmarks or telling her stories about the land. Eliza found herself laughing at his dry humor, asking questions, contributing her own observations. When they finally pulled into the ranch yard, the sun was setting, painting the red rocks gold and pink. Hank and Charlie came out to greet them, and when they heard about the successful market day, Charlie actually whooped and threw his hat in the air. That evening, Eliza made a celebratory supper, using the last of their supplies plus some eggs and vegetables she'd held back from market. The four of them ate together, and for the first time it felt like more than just hired hands and their employer. It felt like family. After supper, Cole walked Eliza out to the porch. The desert night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on a velvet. "I meant what I said earlier," Cole said quietly. "You saved this place. I'd given up hope, if I'm honest. Thought I'd lose the ranch and end up working for Lansing or someone like him. But you—" He trailed off, searching for words. "You saw possibilities where I only saw problems." "You gave me a chance when no one else would," Eliza replied. "I just wanted to prove you hadn't made a mistake." "Mistake?" Cole shook his head. "Claiming you as my wife at that depot was the smartest thing I've done in years." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, and Eliza realized with some surprise that she was happy. Genuinely, unexpectedly happy. The work was hard, the future was uncertain, and they'd only won a single battle in what would likely be a long war with Lansing. But in this moment, standing on this porch with this quiet man who'd given her a second chance, she felt something she hadn't felt since her father's death. She felt like she belonged. "Get some rest," Cole said finally. "Tomorrow we start planning how to make the next payment." "Tomorrow," Eliza agreed. But as she headed to bed that night, she wasn't thinking about loan payments or Cyrus Lansing or the challenges ahead. She was thinking about how Cole had smiled at her in the market, about the word home, about the way her heart had started to beat a little faster when he stood close to her. This arrangement was supposed to be practical, businesslike, temporary, but somewhere between the depot and the market, between the dead garden and the careful counting of coins, something had shifted. Eliza fell asleep with that thought, and this time she dreamed of a garden in full bloom, of a house filled with light and laughter, of gray eyes that saw her not as she appeared to be, but as she actually was. The success at the market changed something fundamental at Broken Spur Ranch. Over the following weeks, Eliza threw herself into transforming the property with a determination that left even Cole impressed. The garden began to flourish under her relentless care. Rows of lettuce and radishes pushing through the red soil, bean plants climbing stakes she'd fashioned from branches, tomato seedlings that she'd started from seeds saved by Cole's sister Sarah. Every morning she was out there before dawn, watering, weeding, coaxing life from ground that had been written off as dead. But the garden was only the beginning. Eliza scrubbed and repaired the chicken coop until the 3 half-wild hens were joined by 6 more that she'd bought with her share of the market profits. She patched the leaking roof in the back bedroom using materials Cole taught her to work with. She reorganized the entire house until it functioned with the efficiency of a well-run ship, every item in its place, every surface clean and cared for. The ranch hands watched this transformation with something approaching awe. Charlie started leaving wildflowers on the kitchen table, his shy way of showing appreciation for the hot meals that appeared 3 times a day. Hank, gruff and suspicious at first, began teaching Eliza about the cattle, showing her how to spot sickness, how to read the weather, how to move through the desert without exhausting herself. And Cole watched her with an intensity that made Eliza's heart race whenever she caught him at it. They'd fallen into a rhythm, the two of them. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, watching the sun paint the canyon walls gold and red. They'd discuss the day's priorities, divide the work, plan for the next market day. Cole had started asking for her opinion on ranch decisions, and Eliza found herself learning the cattle business faster than she'd ever imagined possible. "You've got a head for this," Cole told her one evening as they reviewed the updated account books. His shoulder brushed hers as he leaned over to examine a column of figures, and Eliza tried to ignore the way her pulse jumped at the contact. "Most people take years to understand ranch economics. You picked it up in weeks." "My father used to say that numbers tell stories if you know how to read them," Eliza said, very aware of how close he was sitting. These numbers are telling me we need to expand the herd, but carefully. Maybe 10 more head if we can find good breeding stock at a fair price. 10 more means more grazing land. We'd need to negotiate with Lansing for water rights to the upper creek. Then we find another solution. Eliza turned to look at him and found his face inches from hers. For a moment, neither of them moved. Cole's gray eyes held hers, and Eliza saw something in them that made her breath catch, a hunger that had nothing to do with ranch business or practical arrangements. Then Charlie burst through the door, breathless and agitated, and the moment shattered. "Boss, we got trouble. 3 steers missing from the north pasture, and there's tracks heading toward Lansing's property line." Cole was on his feet instantly, his face hardening. "Show me." Eliza followed them out into the dusk, her earlier warmth replaced by cold dread. Cattle rustling was a serious offense in this territory, but proving it against someone as powerful as Cyrus Lansing would be nearly impossible. The tracks were clear enough, 3 sets of cattle hoofprints and 2 horses, all heading deliberately toward the boundary fence between Broken Spur and Lansing's vast holdings. Cole studied them in the fading light, his expression grim. "Fresh," he said, "maybe 2 hours old. Be twos?" "You think it was Lansing's men?" Hank asked, though the answer was obvious to everyone. "I know it was." Cole straightened, his jaw tight with controlled fury. "He's done this before, back when my father was alive. Takes just enough cattle that you notice, not enough that you can make a case with the territorial marshal. Keeps you off balance, drains your resources bit by bit. What are we going to do?" Charlie looked ready for a fight, young and hot-headed enough to think that was a solution. "Nothing tonight." Cole's tone made it clear the decision was final. "Going after armed men in the dark is suicide. Tomorrow, I'll ride to Lansing's ranch and make it clear this stops now." "Let me come with you," Eliza said. All 3 men turned to stare at her. "Absolutely not," Cole said flatly. "Lansing is dangerous, and I won't put you at risk." "I'm already at risk," Eliza countered. "We all are. And you riding there alone makes it easier for him to intimidate you. But if I'm with you, as your wife, it becomes a social call. Harder for him to make threats in front of a lady." Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but Hank spoke up. "She's got a point, boss. Lansing's got a reputation to maintain in town. He won't be as bold if there's a witness, especially a woman." "I don't like it," Cole said. "You don't have to like it," Eliza replied. "But it's the smart play, and you know it." Cole studied her for a long moment, and Eliza could see the war happening behind his eyes, the desire to protect her fighting against the practical knowledge that she was right. "Fine," he said finally. "But we do this my way. You stay close, you don't engage with Lansing directly, and if things get dangerous, you do exactly what I say. Understood?" "Understood." They rode out at first light the next morning, leaving Hank and Charlie to watch the ranch. The journey to Lansing's property took over an hour, the land gradually changing from Broken Spur's rugged foothills to the gentler, more prosperous terrain that Cyrus Lansing controlled. His ranch house came into view as they crested a rise, a sprawling structure that looked more like a mansion than a working ranch, all white-painted wood and broad verandas utterly out of place in the harsh Arizona landscape. "He built that 5 years ago," Cole said, his tone heavy with disgust. "Brought in architects from San Francisco, wood from Oregon. Spent more on that house than most ranchers make in a lifetime." "All to prove he's better than everyone else," Eliza observed. "That's Cyrus Lansing in a nutshell." They were met at the gate by 2 armed ranch hands who looked more like hired guns than cowboys. One of them rode ahead to announce them, while the other escorted them to the house with a level of suspicion that bordered on hostility. Lansing himself emerged onto the veranda as they approached, dressed in expensive clothes that would have been appropriate in a New York drawing room but seemed absurd here. Victoria stood beside him, her face lighting up with malicious pleasure when she saw Eliza. "Cole Mercer," Lansing said, his voice booming with false bonhomie. "What brings you to my humble home? And you've brought your wife. How domestic." Cole dismounted and helped Eliza down, his hand lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary, a subtle claim that didn't go unnoticed. "I'm missing 3 steers," Cole said without preamble. "Tracks lead straight to your property line. I want them back." Lansing's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. That's a serious accusation, Mercer. You have any proof? I have tracks. I have missing cattle. I have a history of this happening whenever I don't cooperate with your plans. History isn't proof. Lansing's smile was sharp as a knife. You've had trouble keeping your stock contained before. Maybe they just wandered off. This is rough country. Things get lost all the time. My fences are solid, Cole said, his voice dangerously quiet, and my cattle don't just wander onto your land in the middle of the night, escorted by riders. Are you calling me a thief? Lansing's tone hardened. Before Cole could respond, Eliza stepped forward, her voice calm and clear. Of course not, Mr. Lansing. My husband is simply concerned about his missing property. I'm sure if your men happened to find 3 broken spur steers on your land, you'd return them immediately, being the upstanding citizen you are. The suggestion was delicately worded, but the implication was clear. Return the cattle and we'll pretend this was an honest mistake. Lansing could save face, and they could retrieve their property. Lansing studied Eliza with new interest, reassessing her. You're clever, Mrs. Mercer. I'll give you that. But cleverness only goes so far in this territory. So does theft, Eliza replied sweetly, especially when the territorial marshal is known for taking cattle rustling very seriously. Victoria gasped. Father, are you going to let her speak to you like that? Hush, Victoria. Lansing waved his daughter into silence, his eyes never leaving Eliza. Tell me, Mrs. Mercer, what exactly do you think you know about the law? I know that 3 witnesses saw the tracks leading to your property, Eliza said. I know that a formal complaint to the marshal would require an investigation. I know that investigation would be inconvenient for a man in your position, even if nothing came of it. She paused. I also know that returning 3 stray cattle would be a neighborly gesture that would end this matter entirely. Silence fell over the veranda. Lansing's face was unreadable, but Eliza could feel the calculation happening behind his eyes. She'd given him an out, a way to return the cattle without admitting guilt. The question was whether his pride would let him take it. Finally, Lansing laughed, a booming sound that held no warmth. You've got yourself quite a wife, Mercer. She's got more spine than most of the men in Red Hollow. He turned to one of his hands. Check the south pasture, see if any broken spur cattle wandered onto our land. The dismissal was clear, but it was also a capitulation. They'd get their cattle back. Much obliged, Cole said, his tone neutral. Don't mistake this for weakness, Lansing said, his jovial mask slipping. I'm being neighborly, as your wife suggested, but my patience has limits, Mercer. You'd do well to remember that. I'll remember, Cole said. Same as I'll remember that my property is my property, and anyone who takes it will answer for it. They stared at each other for a long moment. 2 men who would never be friends, never trust each other, but who understood the rules of the game they were playing. Victoria, show Mrs. Mercer to the parlor while the men handle this business, Lansing said abruptly. It's too warm out here for a lady. It was clearly a dismissal designed to separate them, but Eliza couldn't refuse without being openly rude. She glanced at Cole, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. How kind, Eliza said, following Victoria into the house. The interior of Lansing's mansion was as ostentatious as the exterior, crystal chandeliers, imported furniture, paintings in gilded frames. It screamed wealth and power, every detail carefully chosen to intimidate and impress. Victoria led her to an elaborate parlor and closed the door with more force than necessary. You think you're so clever, Victoria hissed, her sweet public demeanor vanishing. Standing up to my father like that, playing the dutiful wife. But I know what you really are. And what's that? Eliza asked calmly. A desperate nobody who trapped a failing rancher into marriage because you had nowhere else to go. Victoria's eyes glittered with malice. You think you've won something, but all you've done is tie yourself to a sinking ship. When my father takes Broken Spur, and he will, where will you be then? Standing beside my husband, Eliza said quietly. Fighting for what's ours. Ours? Victoria laughed. You've been there less than a month. You know nothing about this territory, nothing about ranching, nothing about what it takes to survive here. You're playing house in a dead woman's kitchen, wearing hand-me-down dresses, pretending you belong. But you don't, and you never will. The words were designed to wound, and they found their marks. But Eliza had faced worse than Victoria Lansing's petty cruelty. She'd faced poverty and abandonment and public humiliation. She'd rebuilt herself from nothing once already. "You're wrong," Eliza said. "I do belong. Not because of how long I've been here or what I'm wearing or where I came from. I belong because I chose this place, this life, because I'm willing to fight for it. That's more than you can say, living in your father's mansion, playing at power you didn't earn." Victoria's face flushed red with fury. "Get out!" "Gladly." Eliza moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Your father might be powerful, but power built on intimidation and theft is fragile. Eventually, people get tired of being pushed around. When that happens, all your father's money won't save him." She left before Victoria could respond, finding Cole in the front hall in heated conversation with Lansing. Both men looked up as she approached. "Your cattle are being brought around," Lansing said coldly. "I trust this settles the matter." "For now," Cole said. They rode back to Broken Spur in tense silence, 3 steers following behind on lead ropes. It wasn't until they were well away from Lansing's property that Cole finally spoke. "That was dangerous," he said, "threatening him with the marshal." "It worked," Eliza pointed out. "This time. But Lansing doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive. You made an enemy today." "I made an enemy the day I arrived in Red Hollow and refused to leave," Eliza said. "This changes nothing except that now Lansing knows I won't back down." Cole looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You terrify me sometimes. You know that?" "Good," Eliza said, surprising herself with the honesty. "You should be a little afraid of me. Everyone else is." That startled a laugh out of Cole, a real genuine laugh that transformed his serious face. "Fair enough." The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to ranch life. The cattle were watched more carefully, the fences reinforced, and an unspoken understanding settled over the property that they were at war, even if no shots had been fired. Hank and Charlie took turns on night watch, and Cole started carrying his rifle wherever he went. But there were good moments too. The garden continued to thrive, and Eliza's Saturday market trips became a regular occurrence, bringing in steady income that allowed them to slowly chip away at the suffocating debt. She'd built up a loyal customer base, women who appreciated her fair prices and quality produce, who stopped to chat and share gossip and recipes. Through these conversations, Eliza began to understand the complex social web of Red Hollow. She learned who could be trusted and who reported everything back to Lansing. She learned which merchants would extend credit to Broken Spur and which ones had been bought by Lansing's money. She learned that Victoria's hold on the town's social life was more fragile than it appeared, maintained through intimidation rather than genuine affection. One Saturday in late July, as Eliza was packing up her market table, a thin woman in a threadbare dress approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm Ruth Dawson. Charlie's my son." Eliza smiled warmly. "Mrs. Dawson, Charlie's a wonderful young man. You must be very proud." Ruth's worried face softened. "I am. He talks about you and Mr. Mercer all the time. Says you're teaching him to read better." "He's a quick learner," Eliza said, which was true. She'd started giving Charlie evening lessons after discovering he could barely write his own name. "He'll be keeping the ranch books himself before long." That's real kind of you." Ruth twisted her hands nervously. "I actually came to ask a favor, if it's not too much trouble." "Of course. What do you need?" Ruth glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "My husband's been out of work since the mine closed. We're behind on rent, and the landlord, well, he works for Mr. Lansing. He's threatening to evict us if we don't pay by end of month." Eliza felt anger kindle in her chest. This was Lansing's method. Control the property. Control the jobs. Control people's lives through economic stranglehold. "How much do you need?" she asked. "Oh, I'm not asking for charity," Ruth said quickly. "I was wondering if you might need help. I can sew, do laundry, help with the garden. I could work off what we owe." Eliza thought quickly. They didn't really have money for additional help, but she couldn't turn away a woman whose only crime was being poor in Cyrus Lansing's territory. "I do need help with sewing," she said slowly. "I've been mending clothes for the ranch hands, but there's more work than I can manage alone. And if you're good with a needle, I have an idea that might benefit us both. Over the next hour, Eliza outlined her plan. She'd noticed that many of the women in Red Hollow wore the same dresses year after year, making do with what they had because new fabric was expensive and seamstresses were scarce. If Ruth could help her make simple, well-constructed dresses at reasonable prices, they could create another income stream. "You'd trust me with something like that?" Ruth asked, tears in her eyes. "I trust your son," Eliza said. "That says everything I need to know about you." They shook on it, and Ruth left looking lighter than when she'd arrived. Eliza finished packing up, her mind already spinning with possibilities. If she could help one family escape Lansing's economic grip, maybe she could help others. Maybe that was how you fought power, not head-on, but by building alternatives, creating options where none existed before. She was loading the last basket when she heard her name called. Turning, she found the same older woman who'd been her first customer at the market, the one who'd stood up to Victoria Lansing. "Mrs. Chen?" Eliza greeted her warmly. "How are you?" "Busy as always." Mrs. Chen owned the boarding house on the edge of town, one of the few businesses not controlled by Lansing. "I wanted to talk to you about something. Got a moment?" They sat on a bench in the shade, and Mrs. Chen got straight to the point. "You're making waves, girl. You know that?" "I'm just trying to keep my ranch afloat," Eliza said carefully. "You're doing more than that. You're giving people hope." Mrs. Chen's weathered face was serious. "That market day when you stood up to Victoria Lansing? When you refused to be intimidated? People noticed. And now you're helping Ruth Dawson, taking on the Lansings directly over those stolen cattle. Word gets around." "I'm not trying to start a revolution," Eliza said. "I'm just trying to survive." Sometimes those are the same thing. Mrs. Chen leaned closer. "Lansing's been squeezing this town for years. Most folks are too scared to fight back because they've got families to feed, debts to pay. But you're fighting back anyway. That matters." "It won't matter if we lose the ranch," Eliza said quietly. "Then don't lose it." Mrs. Chen stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "There are more people on your side than you realize. Not everyone in Red Hollow has sold their soul to Cyrus Lansing. Remember that." She walked away, leaving Eliza with a strange mix of hope and apprehension. She'd come to Red Hollow looking for a quiet place to rebuild her life. Instead, she'd stumbled into a war she hadn't chosen, fighting an enemy who controlled nearly everything. The ride back to Broken Spur gave her time to think. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold, and Eliza found herself falling in love with this harsh landscape. It wasn't gentle or forgiving, but it was honest. The desert didn't pretend to be something it wasn't, didn't make false promises. You either adapted or you died. She was adapting. When she pulled into the ranch yard, Cole emerged from the barn. He'd been shoeing horses and his shirt was off, his skin gleaming with sweat in the fading light. Eliza felt her breath catch at the sight of him, not just his physical presence, though that was undeniably affecting, but the quiet strength he carried, the way he'd built a life from nothing and refused to let anyone take it from him. "Good day at market?" he asked, helping her down from the wagon. "Very good." Eliza tried to ignore the way her heart raced at his touch. "Made enough to cover next week's supplies plus some extra. And I hired Ruth Dawson to help with sewing." Cole's eyebrows rose. "We can afford that?" "We can't afford not to. If we can create additional income streams, we're less vulnerable to Lansing's manipulation." She explained her plan for the dress business and watched Cole's expression shift from skepticism to approval. "You're building an empire," he said, something like pride in his voice. "I'm building options," Eliza corrected. "Same thing you've been doing with the ranch." They stood there in the dusty yard, the space between them charged with something neither of them quite knew how to name. The practical arrangement they'd agreed to was shifting, becoming something more complex, more dangerous to their carefully maintained boundaries. "Eliza," Cole said, his voice rough, "I need to say something." Her heart hammered. "All right. When I offered you this arrangement, I thought it would be simple. Business, practical. I'd help you, you'd help me. We'd coexist." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "But it's not simple anymore. You're not just help. You're boss." Charlie came running from the south pasture, his face flushed with urgency. "The creek's been dammed upstream. Water's barely trickling through." The moment shattered. Cole's expression hardened instantly, all personal thoughts forgotten. Show me. They followed Charlie to where the creek entered Broken Spur property, and the evidence was undeniable. Someone had built a crude dam just inside Lansing's property line, diverting most of the water away from Broken Spur's land. When did this happen? Cole demanded. Had to be today while we were all occupied, Hank said, having joined them. Water was flowing fine this morning. Cole stared at the reduced trickle, his jaw clenched so tight Eliza feared his teeth might crack. This was worse than stolen cattle. This was an attack on the ranch's lifeblood. Without adequate water, the garden would die, the cattle would suffer, and within weeks they'd be facing disaster. I'm going to tear that dam apart, Cole said, starting forward. Eliza grabbed his arm. Wait. Wait! He turned to her, eyes blazing. He's trying to kill the ranch. I won't let him. If you tear down that dam on his property, he can have you arrested for destruction of property, Eliza said urgently. He's probably counting on you doing exactly that. It's a trap. So what do you suggest? We just let the ranch die of thirst? Eliza thought frantically. The dam was on Lansing's land, which meant they had no legal right to touch it. But water rights in the territory were complicated, governed by laws about prior use and downstream rights. The Territorial Law Office, she said suddenly, they handle water disputes. If we can prove prior use rights to that creek, the territory can force Lansing to remove the dam. That could take weeks, Cole said. We don't have weeks. Then we need a temporary solution while we pursue the legal one. Eliza looked at the creek, following its path with her eyes. What if we dug an irrigation channel? Bring water from further upstream before it crosses into Lansing's land. That's a week of backbreaking work, Hank said. Then we'd better start at first light. Eliza looked at Cole. We fight this smart, not angry. Lansing wants you to react emotionally, to do something he can use against you. Don't give him that satisfaction. Cole was silent for a long moment, wrestling with his fury. Finally, he nodded. All right, we do it your way. But I'm also writing to the territorial office in Tucson. This ends now. The next week was brutal. While Cole was in Tucson filing official complaints about the water rights, Eliza, Hank, and Charlie dug the new irrigation channel. It was exhausting work under the merciless sun, moving tons of red earth one shovelful at a time. Eliza's hands blistered and bled, her back screamed in agony, but she kept digging. Ruth Dawson heard what was happening and showed up with her husband and 2 other families who'd been helped by Eliza's market presence. They brought tools and strong backs and the stubborn determination of people who'd been pushed around too long. We figure it's time someone stood up to Lansing, Ruth's husband said simply. Might as well be now. Word spread, and more people came. Not everyone, many were too afraid of Lansing's retribution, but enough. They dug in shifts, working through the worst heat, passing water and encouragement back and forth. The channel took shape slowly, painfully, but it took shape. Victoria Lansing rode by on the 3rd day, escorted by 2 of her father's men. She watched the work with undisguised contempt. You're wasting your time, she called out. My father will never let you win this. We're not trying to win, Eliza called back, not stopping her work. We're just trying to survive. There's a difference. Not for long, Victoria said, and rode away. But she was wrong. On the 7th day, the channel was complete and water flowed into Broken Spur's land once again. It wasn't as much as before, but it was enough. The garden was saved, the cattle could drink, and the ranch had breathing room. Cole returned that same evening, dusty from travel and grim-faced. Territorial office accepted the complaint, he said. They're sending an inspector within the month. If we can prove prior use, they'll order the dam removed and fine Lansing for interference. And if we can't prove it, Eliza asked, then we live with what we've got. He looked at the new channel, at the exhausted workers packing up their tools, at Eliza's blistered hands. Something shifted in his expression. You did all this while I was gone? We did it together, Eliza said. That's how this works. Cole looked like he wanted to say something, but the moment was broken by grateful neighbors stopping to say goodbye, to accept Eliza's thanks, to promise they'd come to next week's market. That night, after everyone had gone and the ranch was quiet, Eliza sat on the porch steps, too exhausted to even make it to her bed. Her whole body ached, and her hands throbbed despite the salve she'd applied. Cole sat down beside her, a basin of warm water in his hands. "Give me your hands," he said quietly. Eliza hesitated, then extended her battered hands. Cole took them gently, unwrapping the makeshift bandages she'd applied, and began cleaning the worst blisters with a tenderness that made her throat tight. "You didn't have to do this," he said, not looking up from his work. "The channel, the fighting, any of it. This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is." Eliza watched his bent head, the careful way he handled her damaged hands. "This is my home. These are my people now. Of course it's my fight." Cole looked up at that, and in the moonlight, his eyes held something that made Eliza's breath catch. "When I brought you here," he said slowly, "I thought I was doing you a favor, saving you from a bad situation. But you're the one who's been saving me. This ranch, these people, me. You've been saving all of us. Cole, I need to say this." He set aside the basin and took her hands in both of his, cradling them like they were precious. "This arrangement we made, this marriage that's not really a marriage, I don't want that anymore." Eliza's heart stopped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere between the depot and tonight, between watching you face down Lansing and digging channels with bleeding hands and building a community from nothing, I fell in love with you." The words came out rough, as if they'd been dragged from somewhere deep. "I love you, Eliza. Not as help, not as arrangement. As my wife. For real." The world seemed to tilt. Eliza stared at him, this quiet, strong man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd trusted her, respected her, stood beside her through everything. "I love you too," she whispered, and realized it was true. Had been true for longer than she'd admitted to herself. "I think I have for weeks now." Cole's expression transformed, hope and joy breaking through his usual reserve. He raised one of her bandaged hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent heat racing through her entire body. "Then let's make this real," he said. "All of it. Not an arrangement. A marriage. A life together." "Yes," Eliza said, and then she was in his arms, his mouth on hers, and nothing else mattered except this moment, this man, this home they'd built together from nothing but determination and hope. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "Fair warning," he said. "I'm not good with words. I work too much, and Lansing's going to keep coming after us. I can't cook anything fancy. I'm stubborn to a fault, and I'm terrified this is all a dream I'll wake up from," Eliza replied. "Sounds perfect to me." They sat together on those porch steps until the stars came out, talking about everything and nothing, planning their future, choosing each other again and again with every word. The desert night was cool and clear, and somewhere in the darkness, the creek they'd fought so hard to save sang its quiet song. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Lansing wouldn't stop, the bank would keep demanding payments, and the territory would continue testing them. But tonight, they had each other, and that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The weeks that followed their confession brought a new intensity to life at Broken Spur. Cole and Eliza moved through their days with a heightened awareness of each other, stolen glances across the breakfast table, hands brushing during evening chores, goodnight kisses on the porch that grew longer each night. They hadn't yet changed their sleeping arrangements. Both seemed to understand that the physical consummation of their marriage should wait for a proper moment, not be rushed in the chaos of daily survival. But the anticipation hung between them like electricity before a storm. Red Hollow's annual Founders' Day celebration was approaching, scheduled for the last Saturday in August. The entire territory would gather for a day of competitions, feasting, dancing, and the kind of socializing that small frontier communities craved after months of isolation. Eliza had heard about it from her market customers, the excitement building in their voices as they described the elaborate preparations. "You'll come, won't you, Mrs. Mercer?" Mrs. Chen asked one Saturday morning, her weathered face hopeful. "It's the one day a year when the whole territory puts aside work and just enjoys being together." "I'm not sure we'd be welcome," Eliza said carefully, "given our history with the Lansings." "All the more reason to come." Mrs. Chen's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Show them you're not intimidated. Show them you belong here. That evening, Eliza brought up the subject with Cole as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the canyon walls in shades of amber and rose. "Founders' Day," she said. "Should we go?" Cole was quiet for a moment, his expression troubled. "It's Lansing's event. He sponsors it, controls it, uses it to remind everyone who has the power in this territory." He paused. "But if we don't go, it sends a message that we're afraid of him. And if we do go, then we walk into the lion's den and hope we walk back out." Cole looked at her, his gray eyes serious. "It's your choice, Eliza. I'll support whatever you decide." Eliza thought about Mrs. Chen's words, about all the people who'd helped dig the irrigation channel, about Ruth Dawson and the other families quietly building lives outside of Lansing's control. They needed to see that resistance was possible, that you could stand up to power and survive. "We should go," she said firmly, "together, as husband and wife." Something shifted in Cole's expression, pride maybe, or love, or both tangled together. "Then we'll go. But there's something I want to do first." He disappeared into the house and returned carrying a small wooden box that Eliza had never seen before. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a ring, simple gold with a single small diamond that caught the fading light. "It was my mother's," Cole said quietly. "My father gave it to her when they married. She wore it every day until she died." He took Eliza's hand, his touch gentle. "I know we've been married legally for weeks now, but I want to do this right. Eliza Mercer, will you wear this ring? Will you be my wife, not just in name but in truth, for as long as we both live?" Tears pricked Eliza's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Cole slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all this time for her. They kissed then, deep and slow, a promise sealed without words. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Eliza had Ruth help her alter one of Sarah's old dresses, a deep blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes and fit her figure properly after careful adjustment. It wasn't fancy by Victoria Lansing standards, but it was respectable and pretty, and when Cole saw her in it, the look in his eyes made Eliza feel beautiful. Founders' Day dawned clear and hot, the kind of perfect Arizona summer day that made even the desert seem benevolent. The entire town had transformed overnight. Banners hung between buildings, tables groaned under the weight of contributed food, and a raised platform had been erected in the town square for speeches and dancing. Cole and Eliza arrived mid-morning, the wagon loaded with pies Eliza had baked and vegetables from their garden to contribute to the communal feast. As they pulled into town, Eliza felt dozens of eyes turn toward them, felt the whispers start and spread like ripples in water. "Steady," Cole murmured, helping her down. "We belong here as much as anyone." They made their way to the food tables, where Mrs. Chen greeted them warmly, and Ruth Dawson hurried over to admire Eliza's dress and the ring now visible on her finger. "It's beautiful," Ruth breathed, "and you two look so happy together." "We are," Eliza said, and meant it with her whole heart. The morning passed pleasantly enough. There were competitions, shooting contests, horse races, roping demonstrations, and Cole participated in several, his quiet competence earning respect from men who'd previously kept their distance. Eliza found herself surrounded by her market customers, women who'd come to appreciate her fair dealing and honest conversation. But the peace couldn't last. Victoria Lansing arrived in a confection of pink silk that must have cost more than most families earned in a year, surrounded by her usual entourage of admirers. She surveyed the crowd with the air of a queen inspecting her subjects, and her eyes narrowed when they landed on Eliza. "Well," Victoria said loudly enough to be heard across the square, "I see the help is mingling with their betters today." Several people nearby froze, unsure whether to acknowledge the insult or pretend they hadn't heard. Eliza felt Cole tense beside her, but she laid a hand on his arm. "Miss Lansing," she said calmly, "how lovely you look. Though I'd be careful in that silk. The dust here can be terribly unforgiving." It was a mild observation, but the implication was clear. Victoria's expensive dress was impractical and out of place. A few people nearby smothered smiles. Victoria's face flushed. "At least some of us can afford silk instead of making do with hand-me-downs and alterations." "True," Eliza agreed pleasantly, But I found that what you wear matters far less than what you do. A fancy dress can't disguise an ugly character. Gasps rippled through the crowd. No one spoke to Victoria Lansing that way. Not in public, not where her father could hear about it. "How dare you?" Victoria began, but she was interrupted by a commotion near the platform. Cyrus Lansing had arrived, and with him was James Hartwell, the man who'd rejected Eliza at the depot all those weeks ago. Eliza's stomach dropped. She hadn't seen Hartwell since that humiliating day, and she'd been content to let that particular shame remain in the past. But Lansing had brought him here deliberately, and from the calculating look on the older man's face, Eliza knew this was no accident. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lansing's voice boomed across the square, "if I might have your attention, as you know, Founders' Day is when we celebrate our community, when we honor the bonds that hold us together." He paused dramatically. "It's also when we right wrongs and address matters of questionable propriety." The crowd shifted uneasily. Cole's hand found Eliza's, gripping tight. "It has come to my attention," Lansing continued, "that certain arrangements in our community may not be entirely legitimate. Mr. James Hartwell has something to say on this matter." Hartwell stepped forward, looking uncomfortable but determined. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly. "I sent for Miss Eliza Harrow to be my wife," he said. "She arrived as promised, and I paid for her passage. But before we could marry, she was taken by Cole Mercer under false pretenses." Murmurs erupted. Eliza felt ice flood her veins. This was it. The public accusation, the attempt to delegitimize her marriage and her place at Broken Spur. "I paid for that woman," Hartwell continued, warming to his subject. "I have the receipts, the correspondence, everything. She was meant to be my wife, and Mercer stole her from me. I demand she be returned to fulfill her obligation." The crowd's murmur grew louder. Some faces showed sympathy for Hartwell. Others showed curiosity about how this drama would unfold. But many, including Mrs. Chen and Ruth Dawson and the other market women, looked angry on Eliza's behalf. Cole started to step forward, but Eliza held him back. This was her fight. These were lies about her character, her choices. She needed to be the one to answer them. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, her voice cutting through the noise with surprising authority, "is it true you sent for me?" Hartwell blinked, thrown by her directness. "Yes, Is it true I arrived when I said I would, exactly as promised?" "Well, yes, but... And is it true that when I arrived, you took one look at me and rejected me? Told me I wasn't what you expected? Gave me money for a return ticket and walked away without another word?" Hartwell's face reddened. "You were different from your photograph. I had every right to..." "You had every right to change your mind," Eliza agreed. "Just as I had every right to accept a better offer when one was made. You rejected me, Mr. Hartwell, publicly, in front of witnesses. You can't now claim I was stolen from you when you'd already thrown me away." "She's right," Mrs. Chen called out. "I was at the depot that day. Hartwell rejected her like she was spoiled goods. Then Mercer offered her honest work and respect." "Honest work?" Victoria's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Is that what we're calling it? Everyone knows what kind of arrangement this really is. A desperate woman and a failing rancher making a convenient trade." "You're right," Eliza said, and the admission shocked everyone into silence. "I was desperate. I'd lost everything. My father, my home, my prospects. I came west hoping for a new start, and instead I was humiliated and abandoned." She looked around the crowd, meeting eyes, refusing to hide. "But Cole Mercer didn't take advantage of that desperation. He offered me dignity when everyone else offered contempt. He gave me work, respect, and a chance to prove my worth. And somewhere along the way, we fell in love." She turned to Cole, and the look in his eyes gave her strength to continue. "This isn't a convenient arrangement," she said. "It's a marriage. A real one, built on trust and partnership and genuine affection. It's worth more than any match made through advertisements or social climbing or business deals. It's real." "Prove it," Victoria challenged. "If you're really married, really in love, prove it's not just a business transaction." Cole had been silent through all of this, letting Eliza fight her own battle. But now he stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority that made men follow him and cattle settle. "You want proof?" he asked. "Here's your proof." He turned to Eliza, and in front of the entire assembled territory, he cupped her face in his work-roughened hands and kissed her. Not a polite peck, not a performance, but a real kiss, deep and passionate and utterly genuine. Eliza melted into it, her hands gripping his shirt, and for a moment the crowd, the accusations, everything else disappeared. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole kept his forehead pressed to Eliza's. "I love you," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're my wife, my partner, my choice. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." The crowd erupted. Some people cheered, others looked scandalized, but the mood had shifted decisively. You couldn't fake what everyone had just witnessed, the genuine emotion, the real connection between two people who'd found each other against all odds. "This is outrageous." Lansing's face was red with fury. "Hartwell has a legitimate claim." "No, he doesn't." The new voice came from the edge of the crowd, and everyone turned to see who'd spoken. It was Judge Morrison, the territorial magistrate who rode circuit through the region. He was a stern old man with a reputation for fairness and no tolerance for nonsense. "Hartwell rejected Miss Harrow in front of witnesses," Judge Morrison said. "That constitutes a breach of their agreement. She was free to accept other arrangements. Furthermore, I have the marriage certificate for Cole and Eliza Mercer, properly filed and legal. There's no case here, Cyrus, no matter how much you want there to be." Lansing's expression turned murderous, but he couldn't argue with the territorial judge. He'd been outmaneuvered, and everyone knew it. Hartwell, seeing his support crumbling, tried one more time. "But I paid for her passage. I deserve compensation at least." "You were compensated by having a bullet dodged," Eliza said coolly. "I would have made you a terrible wife, Mr. Hartwell. I'm far too stubborn, too opinionated, and too unwilling to be treated as property. You're better off without me, and I'm infinitely better off without you." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Even some of Hartwell's supporters couldn't suppress smiles at Eliza's blunt honesty. "As for you, Mr. Lansing," Eliza continued, riding the wave of support she could feel building, "I know this isn't really about my marriage or Mr. Hartwell's wounded pride. This is about you trying to destroy my husband because he won't sell you his land. But here's what you don't understand. We're not alone anymore. We have friends, allies, people who are tired of being pushed around." She gestured to the crowd, to Mrs. Chen and Ruth Dawson, and the dozens of other faces who'd helped dig the irrigation channel, who bought her produce, who'd quietly been building resistance to Lansing's dominance. "You can try to take our water, steal our cattle, manipulate our debts," Eliza said. "But you can't take our community. You can't steal the relationships we've built or the trust we've earned. And eventually that's going to matter more than all your money and power." Silence fell. Cyrus Lansing stared at Eliza with undisguised hatred, and she saw the exact moment he decided she'd become an enemy worth destroying. But she also saw something else in the crowd. Hope. People standing a little straighter, looking at Lansing with less fear than before. "This isn't over," Lansing said quietly, his voice carrying a threat that made several people flinch. "No," Cole agreed, moving to stand beside Eliza. "It's not, but we're ready for whatever comes next." Lansing and Hartwell left, Victoria trailing behind with her entourage, all of them trying to maintain dignity in retreat. The crowd watched them go, then erupted into conversation, everyone talking at once about what they'd just witnessed. Judge Morrison approached Cole and Eliza, a slight smile on his stern face. "That was quite a performance, young lady," he said. "It wasn't a performance, Your Honor," Eliza replied. "It was the truth." "I know, that's what made it effective." He glanced at Cole. "You've got yourself quite a wife, Mercer. Don't let her go." "Wasn't planning on it," Cole said, his arm tightening around Eliza's waist. The rest of the day passed in a blur. People approached to offer congratulations, support, stories of their own struggles with Lansing's control. The community meal was served, and Eliza found herself seated at a table with women who'd previously kept their distance, all of them eager to talk, to share, to connect. As the sun set and the dancing began, Cole led Eliza onto the platform that had been cleared for couples. The fiddle player struck up a waltz, and Cole pulled her close. "I can't dance very well," he warned. "Neither can I," Eliza admitted. "We'll figure it out together." They swayed to the music, finding their rhythm, and Eliza realized this was a perfect metaphor for their entire relationship. Two people who didn't quite know what they were doing, making it up as they went along, but committed to figuring it out together. "You were magnificent today," Cole murmured against her hair. "The way you stood up to them, the way you spoke the truth. I've never been prouder of anyone in my life." "I couldn't have done it without you beside me," Eliza said. "Knowing you were there, knowing you believed in me, that gave me the courage. We make a good team. The best." They danced until the moon rose high and silver, until Eliza's feet ached and her voice was hoarse from conversation and laughter. Other couples joined them on the platform, and Eliza caught sight of Ruth Dawson dancing with her husband, Mrs. Chen clapping along to the music, Charlie attempting to court a shy girl from a neighboring ranch. This was community. This was what they'd been fighting for, not just survival, but the right to build a life surrounded by people who cared, who helped, who showed up when it mattered. The ride home was quiet, both of them exhausted but content. The ranch welcomed them back with familiar sounds, the windmill's creak, the cattle's low murmur, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. Cole helped Eliza down from the wagon, but instead of releasing her, he swept her up into his arms. "What are you doing?" Eliza laughed. "Carrying my wife over the threshold," Cole said. "We did it wrong the first time, figured we should do it right." He carried her into the house, past the kitchen they'd cleaned together, past the ledgers they'd balanced side by side, straight to his bedroom. Their bedroom now. He set her down gently, and they stood there in the moonlight streaming through the window, suddenly uncertain despite all they'd been through together. "Eliza," Cole said softly, "we don't have to... if you're not ready." She silenced him with a kiss, pouring into it all the love and desire and certainty she felt. When she pulled back, she was smiling. "I'm ready," she said. "I've been ready. I love you, Cole Mercer, and I want to be your wife in every possible way." "I love you too," he whispered. And then there were no more words, just touch and breath, and the quiet communion of two people finally, fully choosing each other. Later, wrapped in each other's arms, Eliza thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the humiliation at the depot to this moment of perfect contentment, she'd traveled further than the 2,000 miles from Philadelphia. She'd traveled from despair to hope, from shame to pride, from loneliness to love. "What are you thinking?" Cole asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I'm glad James Hartwell rejected me," Eliza said honestly. "If he hadn't, I never would have found you, never would have found this life." Cole was quiet for a moment, then, "I'm glad too, though I'd like to punch him in the face for how he treated you." Eliza laughed. "Very romantic. I'm a rancher, not a poet," but his voice was warm with humor. They drifted towards sleep, safe and warm and together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Lansing wouldn't forget today's humiliation, and there would be consequences for standing against him so publicly. But they'd face those challenges the same way they'd faced everything else, together, with determination and hope, and the quiet certainty that they'd built something worth fighting for. The last thing Eliza heard before sleep claimed her was Cole's steady heartbeat beneath her ear, and she thought there was no sweeter sound in the entire world. Morning came with the rooster's crow and the familiar rhythm of ranch life. But something was different now. The bed was shared, the morning kiss was real, and when they sat down to breakfast with Hank and Charlie, they did so as a genuinely married couple, no longer hiding behind practical arrangements. "About damn time," Hank muttered when he noticed their joined hands. "Language," Cole said automatically, but he was grinning. "Congratulations, boss. Mrs. Mercer." Charlie was practically bouncing with excitement. "Does this mean we're going to have a real celebration?" "I think we had enough celebration yesterday," Eliza said, but she was smiling too. The days that followed settled into a new pattern. Eliza continued her market trips and her sewing business with Ruth, but now she returned home to a husband who kissed her properly and held her through the night. The ranch continued to thrive under their combined management, the garden producing more than ever, the cattle healthy and multiplying. But Lansing's shadow still loomed. The territorial inspector came and went, ruling in their favor on the water rights and ordering the dam removed. But everyone knew that was just one battle in a longer war. Lansing had too much invested in controlling the territory to simply give up because of one setback. The real test came 3 weeks after Founders Day, when Cole returned from town with news that made Eliza's blood run cold. "Lansing's called in the full loan," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "All of it, due within 30 days, or he forecloses." Eliza felt the world tilt. Can he do that? According to the contract, if we miss a payment or if he deems the loan at risk, he can demand immediate full repayment. Cole's jaw was clenched so tight it looked painful. We've never missed a payment, but he's claiming that our confrontational behavior makes us a credit risk. How much? $1,800. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. They'd been making steady progress on the debt, but $1,800 was impossible. Even selling every head of cattle, every piece of equipment, the house itself, it wouldn't be enough. "He's finally found a way to take the ranch," Cole said quietly. "And there's nothing we can do to stop him." Eliza's mind raced, running through possibilities, calculating options. There had to be a way. There was always a way if you were willing to look hard enough, fight hard enough, risk enough. "We have 30 days, she said. "That's longer than we had to make the first payment, longer than we had to dig the irrigation channel. We've beaten impossible odds before." "Eliza, this is different. This isn't $40 or a week of hard work. This is—" "I know what it is," she interrupted. "It's Lansing trying to break us, but we're not broken yet." She grabbed his hands, forcing him to look at her. "We fight. We don't give up. We don't run. We fight with everything we have. Together." Cole stared at her, and slowly the despair in his eyes transformed into something else. Determination, hope, the stubborn refusal to surrender that had kept Broken Spur alive this long. "Together," he agreed. They spent the evening planning, calculating, looking for any possible source of funds. The next morning, Eliza rode to town with a purpose. If Lansing wanted war, she'd give him war. But she'd fight it her way, not with violence or intimidation, but with community and creativity and the same stubborn determination that had gotten her this far. Because she'd learned something important since arriving in Red Hollow. She'd learned that power wasn't just about money or land or control. Real power came from people choosing to stand together, from communities refusing to be divided, from individuals deciding that some things were worth fighting for no matter the cost. And she was ready to fight. Eliza's first stop was Mrs. Chen's boarding house. The older woman listened carefully as Eliza explained the situation, her weathered face growing more grim with each detail. "Lansing's playing for keeps this time," Mrs. Chen said when Eliza finished. $1,800 in 30 days. He knows that's impossible." "It would be impossible alone," Eliza agreed. "But we're not alone. That's what I've been learning since I arrived here. This community is stronger than Lansing wants us to believe." Mrs. Chen studied her shrewdly. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A loan circle. Everyone who can contributes what they're able, $10, $20, whatever they can spare. We pool it together, pay off Lansing, then pay everyone back over time with interest. It spreads the risk across the community instead of crushing one family." "You'd be asking people to risk their savings to save your ranch," Mrs. Chen pointed out. "People who don't have much to spare." "I know, but I'm also offering them something in return. Proof that we don't have to let Lansing control everything. If we can save Broken Spur, we show everyone that there's another way." Eliza leaned forward. How many families has Lansing crushed by calling in loans early? How many businesses has he destroyed by manipulating credit? If we break that pattern, even once, it changes everything. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to a strongbox hidden behind a loose board. She counted out bills carefully. $150, more money than Eliza had ever seen her carry. "This is everything I've saved for the past 5 years, Mrs. Chen said. "I was planning to expand the boarding house, maybe buy the building outright. But you're right. If Lansing can destroy you, he can destroy any of us. I'd rather invest in fighting back." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "Mrs. Chen, I can't take your life savings." "You're not taking it. I'm investing it. You'll pay me back with interest, just like you said." The older woman's expression softened. "Besides, I've grown fond of you, girl. You remind me of myself 40 years ago, stubborn, determined, refusing to accept what everyone said was impossible. The territory needs more women like us." They shook hands, partners in rebellion, and Eliza left with the first piece of the impossible puzzle in place. Over the next week, she repeated the conversation with Ruth Dawson, with the families who'd helped dig the irrigation channel, with merchants who'd grown tired of Lansing's monopolistic practices. Some could only contribute $5 or $10. Others, like Mrs. Chen, risked substantial savings. But slowly, painfully, the fund grew. Cole worked a different angle, reaching out to ranchers in the surrounding territory who'd also chafed under Lansing's control. He found sympathetic ears but little ready cash. Most frontier ranchers lived season to season, with no reserves to spare. Still, a few contributed what they could, and word spread that something unprecedented was happening in Red Hollow. By the end of the second week, they'd raised $1,100. It was an astonishing sum, more than Eliza had dared hope for, but it was still $700 short of what they needed. Time was running out. Then Judge Morrison appeared at Broken Spur one evening, riding a tired horse and carrying a worn leather satchel. "Heard about your loan circle," he said without preamble. "Interesting legal concept. Risky, but interesting." "We're doing everything legally," Eliza said quickly. "Proper contracts, fair interest rates, transparent accounting." "I know. I checked." Morrison's stern face almost smiled. "That's why I'm here. I'm contributing $200 to your fund." Both Cole and Eliza stared at him in shock. "Your Honor, we can't accept," Cole began. "Yes, you can. I've watched Cyrus Lansing manipulate this territory's legal and financial systems for 20 years. I'm bound by law to remain impartial in court, but there's nothing preventing me from making private investments in enterprises I believe have merit." He pulled out a contract and a stack of bills. "Consider this my statement about which side of this fight I'm on." After Morrison left, Cole and Eliza sat in stunned silence. $1,300 now, only $500 short. "We might actually do this," Cole whispered, as if saying it too loudly might jinx their chances. "We will do this," Eliza corrected, but privately she wondered where they'd find the remaining $500. They'd already asked everyone they could think of, exhausted every reasonable source. They needed a miracle, and miracles were in short supply in the Arizona Territory. The miracle arrived 3 days later in the form of a telegraph message delivered to their door. It was from Sarah, Cole's sister in Tucson, and it was brief and to the point. "Heard about loan situation. Stop sending $300. Stop. Fight like hell. Stop. Stop. Love, Sarah." Cole's hand shook as he read it. She was saving for a house. Her and her husband, they were going to buy their own place in Tucson. This is everything they had. "Family takes care of family," Eliza said softly, though her throat was tight with emotion. "We'll pay her back, every penny." $1,600 now. Only $200 short, with less than a week remaining. Eliza spent the next 2 days in a frenzy of activity. She sold every vegetable in the garden, every egg the chickens had produced, every jar of preserves she'd been saving for winter. She took in extra sewing, working late into the night by lamplight until her fingers bled. Cole sold a piece of equipment they could barely afford to lose, made deals to lease grazing rights they'd need next season, pushed every resource to its absolute limit. By the morning of the deadline, they had $1,783. They were still $17 short. Eliza sat at the kitchen table, staring at the carefully counted stack of bills, and felt despair threaten to swallow her. They'd fought so hard, come so close, and it still wasn't enough. $17, less than what she'd made on her first market day, less than a week's worth of eggs, less than nothing in the grand scheme of things. But it might as well have been $17,000 for all the good it did them. "We could sell my mother's ring," Cole said quietly. Eliza looked up sharply. "Absolutely not. That ring is worth maybe $20. Enough to make up the difference and have a little left over." His voice was steady, but she could see the pain in his eyes. "It's just metal and stone, Eliza. The ranch is what matters. My mother would have understood that." "No." Eliza's voice was fierce. "We're not sacrificing something that means so much to you, not for Cyrus Lansing's benefit. There has to be another way." But she couldn't think of one. They'd exhausted every option, called in every favor, stretched every resource past breaking. There was simply nothing left. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted her spiral into despair. They went to the window and saw a sight that made Eliza's heart sink. Victoria Lansing, riding side saddle on a beautiful bay mare, heading straight for their door. "What fresh hell is this?" Cole muttered. They stepped onto the porch as Victoria dismounted, her expensive riding dress somehow immaculate despite the dusty journey. But something was different about her. The usual smug superiority was missing, replaced by an expression Eliza couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Mercer. Mr. Mercer." Victoria's voice was oddly formal. "Might I speak with you privately?" Cole looked ready to refuse, but Eliza was curious enough to nod. They led Victoria into the house, and she stood in the middle of their simple kitchen, looking profoundly uncomfortable. "I know what my father is doing to you," Victoria said without preamble. "The early loan call, the impossible deadline. I know because I've seen him do it to others. Break them financially, take their property, add it to his empire." She paused, and something like pain crossed her face. "I watched him destroy 3 families last year, alone. Good people who'd done nothing wrong except stand in his way." "Why are you telling us this?" Eliza asked, suspicious of the sudden confession. Victoria's laugh was bitter. "Because I'm tired of being his weapon. Tired of being the beautiful, cruel daughter who helps him break people by breaking their spirits first." She looked directly at Eliza. "I've been horrible to you. Deliberately, viciously horrible. I told myself it was because you didn't belong here, because you were an outsider trying to take what wasn't yours. But the truth is, I was jealous." "Jealous?" Eliza couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "Of what?" "Of your freedom, your choices, your real marriage to someone who actually loves you instead of your father's money." Victoria's voice cracked. "Do you know what it's like to be Cyrus Lansing's daughter? To be nothing but an ornament, a tool, a prize he uses to control other people? I'm 26 years old, and I've never made a single decision about my own life. Every dress, every friend, every potential suitor, all chosen by him to serve his purposes." Eliza felt an unexpected stab of sympathy. She'd spent so much time hating Victoria Lansing that she'd never considered what it might cost to be her. "Why are you really here?" Cole asked, his tone still wary. Victoria reached into her reticule and pulled out a small cloth bag. She set it on the table and coins clinked inside. $35, she said. "It's everything I have that's truly mine. Money my mother left me before she died, kept secret from my father. I want you to use it to save your ranch." Eliza and Cole stared at the bag as if it might contain a snake. "This is a trick," Cole said flatly. "Your father sent you to take. My father doesn't know I'm here." Victoria's voice was sharp. "And if he finds out, there will be hell to pay. But I don't care anymore. I'm so tired of being part of his destruction." She looked at Eliza. "You stood up to him. You fought back. You showed me that it's possible to choose differently, even when the whole world says you can't. The least I can do is help you keep fighting." Eliza searched Victoria's face, looking for deception, for the trap she was certain must be there. But all she saw was a desperate, lonely woman making what might be the first real choice of her life. "If we accept this," Eliza said slowly, "you won't have anything left." "I'll have something more important than money." Victoria's smile was sad but genuine. "I'll have done one good thing, one real thing that was my choice, not his." Eliza looked at Cole, saw her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. This could still be a trap, but it could also be exactly what Victoria claimed, a woman reaching for freedom in the only way she knew how. "All right," Eliza said, "we accept. But this is a loan, just like all the others. We'll pay you back with interest." "I don't want you—" "This is how we do things," Eliza interrupted firmly. "Everyone who helped us becomes part of something bigger, a community that looks out for each other, that refuses to let Lansing's way be the only way. If you want to be part of that, you follow the same rules as everyone else." For a moment, Victoria looked like she might cry. Then she nodded, gathering herself. "All right. A loan, then. To be repaid when you're able." They drew up the contract right there, Eliza's careful handwriting documenting the terms. When it was done, Victoria signed it with a shaking hand, and Eliza saw the exact moment the other woman realized she'd just committed an act of outright rebellion against her father. "He's going to be furious," Victoria whispered. "Probably," Eliza agreed. "What will you do?" I don't know. Maybe. Victoria trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. Maybe it's time I found out who I am when I'm not just Cyrus Lansing's daughter. After Victoria left, Eliza counted the money with shaking hands. $1,818. Enough to pay off the loan with $18 to spare. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, against Cyrus Lansing's power and wealth and manipulation, they'd actually done it. Cole pulled Eliza into his arms, and she felt him trembling, with relief, with joy, with the overwhelming emotion of a fight won after it had seemed hopelessly lost. "We did it," he whispered against her hair. "We actually did it." No, Eliza said, pulling back to look at him. "We all did it. Every person who contributed, who believed, who chose to stand together instead of being divided. That's what beat Lansing. Not us alone, but all of us together." The next morning, they rode into Red Hollow with the full payment. Word had spread about the loan circle, and the street outside the bank was crowded with people who'd contributed. Mrs. Chen, Ruth Dawson, Judge Morrison, and dozens of others. They'd come to witness the moment, to be part of the victory. Cyrus Lansing was waiting in his office, Victoria standing silently beside him. When Eliza and Cole entered and set the money on his desk, Lansing's expression barely changed, but Eliza saw the flash of frustrated rage in his eyes. $1,800, Cole said calmly. "Full payment of the loan you called in. Count it if you'd like." Lansing counted it anyway, slowly and deliberately, searching for any excuse to reject it. But the money was all there, clean and legal and impossible to refuse. "I see you found some creative financing," Lansing said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Begging from the whole territory to save your pathetic ranch." "Not begging," Eliza corrected. "Investing. Everyone who contributed is now part of something bigger than any one ranch or one person's power. You taught us that, actually. You showed us what happens when one person controls too much. So we built something different." "You've built nothing but debt," Lansing sneered. "You'll spend years paying back all these investors, scraping by, barely surviving. And the moment you stumble, I'll be there to take what should have been mine all along." "Maybe," Cole said. "Or maybe we'll thrive. Maybe this loan circle becomes a credit union that lets families get loans at fair rates instead of predatory ones. Maybe the community we've built becomes strong enough that your kind of power doesn't work anymore." He stood, pulling Eliza up with him. "Either way, Broken Spur Ranch is paid in full. You have no claim on it, or us." They turned to leave, but Victoria spoke up for the first time. "Father, I need to tell you something." Everyone froze. Victoria's voice was shaking, but her chin was up, her posture defiant. "I contributed to their loan fund," she said. $35 from the money Mother left me. It was my choice, and I'd do it again." The silence that followed was terrible. Lansing's face went from red to purple, and for a moment Eliza thought he might actually strike his daughter. "You did what?" The words came out in a whisper more frightening than any shout. "I chose," Victoria said simply. "For the first time in my life, I made my own choice, and I chose to help them instead of helping you destroy them." "Get out!" Lansing's voice was cold as death. "Get out of my office, out of my house, out of my sight. You are no daughter of mine." Victoria flinched, but she didn't back down. "Fine, I'll go. I should have left years ago." She walked out with her head high, and after a moment's hesitation, Eliza followed her. They found Victoria standing on the bank steps, breathing hard, looking terrified and exhilarated all at once. "What will you do?" Eliza asked. "I don't know." Victoria laughed shakily. "I've never had to figure that out before, but Mrs. Chen mentioned her boarding house might need help managing the accounts. And I'm told I'm quite good with numbers when I'm allowed to use my brain for something besides calculating social humiliations. "Come to supper tomorrow," Eliza heard herself say. "At the ranch. We can talk about options, opportunities. You're not alone in this." Victoria stared at her. "After everything I've done to you, you'd help me? You helped us when we needed it most. Besides," Eliza smiled, "I know what it's like to start over with nothing. It's terrifying, but it's also the most freeing thing in the world. You deserve a chance to find that out." They parted as something not quite friends, but no longer enemies either. Two women who'd both fought their own battles against the same man and were still standing. The weeks that followed brought a transformation to Red Hollow that no one had anticipated. The loan circle evolved into exactly what Cole had suggested, a community credit union that offered fair loans to families who'd previously had no choice but to accept Lansing's predatory terms.